That's right. Gotham. On your feet. To the lyrical flow of Bane. I'm Bane, yes, that's my name. When you hear the name Bane, I guarantee the pain. I'm coming after you, Bruce Wayne. I'm stronger, smarter, clinically insane. I'm Bane, that's my name. Bruce Wayne and the Batman are totally the same. I broke his back, Mortal Kombat smack. Then I cracked my 28 Krug champagne. Who likes hip-hop? I heard Gotham City was alright.
Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack
and Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. It is part 10, reaching double digits, of our Batman on Film series as we arrive at the end of the Christopher Nolan era and the beginning of the Weekly Stuff Podcast era of Batman with The Dark Knight Rises from 2012, starring Christian Bale and Tom Hardy. And one of the first movies we ever reviewed on this podcast, I think it's like episode 6 or 7, is our original Dark Knight Rises review. So you can go way back in the archives and find that if you want. They're all on YouTube now, so they're easy to find. I don't know if I would recommend that because that's a very early podcast and it wasn't good yet. But you know, we are reaching full circle, Sean. Time is a flat circle.
Yeah, it is. It was a weird feeling. I watched the movie last night for the first time since when I watched it for that podcast, what is now almost 10 years ago, because the movie came out summer 2012.
Yep.
So it's 9 years ago now. And it was a very weird experience of hitting certain points of the movie where I had forgotten a huge swaths of what that movie was. And then I would hit a scene, and all of a sudden I would remember something that I said on that podcast like 9 years ago, which was a very surreal feeling experience. But yes, we have come full circle, and we've watched a lot of Batman movies at this point.
We have. This is number 10. We got a few more to go. This is in some ways, though, like the climax, I feel like, coming back around to this one, you know? I guess, so that'll be our main topic today. We also want to talk about the Nintendo Switch announcement, a couple other little pieces of news, mostly going to be about Dark Knight Rises. I guess one question, have you seen Black Widow yet?
No, I have not.
Okay, so we're not talking about Black Widow. It was fine. I don't know if I would have more than 10 minutes of stuff to talk about with that movie, to be frank. So I don't think...
I don't even know where there's a movie theater. Like, I need to actually, like, look that up and find out, because I literally, legitimately don't know, because there hasn't been a movie out yet since I've been in Texas.
Well, you haven't lived there that long.
Yes.
And, yeah, Sean, you could pay $30 to watch it on Disney+.
Yeah, no. That's a lot of money.
Did you know how many people have done that, though? 2 million, because Disney announced today that they made $60 million off of the Disney Plus version. So, 2 million people.
People have a poor sense of the value of money, I guess.
Well, it depends. Like, let's say you're a family of 4.
Okay, sure.
That is cheaper. And Disney Plus does have a lot of people to whom that is the main demographic. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I agree. If you are one of us who's a single dude living alone, it is just factually cheaper to go see it at a movie theater.
Yes. But
yeah, if you're a family of 4 and you don't want to have to deal with all that shit, or you have little kids and you don't want to have to pay a babysitter, I do get it. But I do think Disney is gouging the fuck out of people with that, and they can fuck themselves. But anyway, Black Widow, it was fine. I will have to say I am in pretty heavy MCU fatigue after 2 years away post-Endgame and a long time off, and then those first couple of Disney Plus shows were just so heavy on continuity and shit, and I haven't started Loki yet, which seems like it's the only thing everyone's agreed is great so far this year, so I should watch it. But anyway, it's got Owen Wilson, who's one of my favorite actors. But yeah, Black Widow was fine. Don't pay $30 for it, but watch it if you want to. But we'll be talking about The Dark Knight Rises. Sean, I guess just briefly, what did you think coming back to it this time? I'm really curious, or a quick spoiler, preview of the topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think our conversation on The Dark Knight Rises is going to be fairly similar to our conversations on Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, because I think it is that thing where it has a lot of the same problems as those two movies, and I think they're exaggerated in The Dark Knight Rises. It's the thing of where There are scenes and sequences in that movie that I think are very entertaining unto themselves. I think the movie as like a story is confusing and weird and structurally all over the place. It is horribly paced. It's about, I mean, it's a 2 hour, 45-minute long movie, and it's just sort of like restarts the story. And for that last hour where you're like, oh man, I thought we were getting near the end, and now there's an hour left of the film. This is kind of ridiculous. Yeah, and I think it's got just like very noxious, gross politics, and they are like so hardcore front and center, particularly in this one. In a way that like I think I could forgive people for watching Batman Begins and The Dark Knight in a modern context and not caring that much about how kind of politically noxious those movies are, because it's not as like kicking you in the teeth with it as The Dark Knight Rises, which my overall impressions are it is a movie that is borrowing a lot from the French Revolution in terms of what it's doing, but it has a very interesting take on the French Revolution, which is that it seems to think that the bad part about the French Revolution was the part where they got rid of the monarchy, which I've never really seen that historical take before, but that's very much what The Dark Knight Rises thinks.
Oh, yeah. I would describe this movie's politics as raving lunatic on a street corner who's been watching too much Fox News, only he's dressed in a suit. He looks nice. He's well-groomed, but he is, in fact, a raving lunatic who's been mainlining too much Fox News.
Yeah, it is like pretty incredible what you're getting with this movie in terms of how it's a thing where you have to kind of break your brain, and it was a process I had to do watching the movie last night where I was like, I couldn't grasp some stuff in the movie until I was like, I just have to abandon a reasonable worldview to even understand what the movie's trying to do with Batman as a character. So yeah, that's my overall impressions. It was a movie that made me hurt myself in order to try to actually understand what it was trying to say.
Here's my overall impression, Sean. This is my preview of our talk. I remember after this movie came out, so it came out in the summer, I go back to college in the fall, doing my undergrad. One of my professors, who's a very flamboyant person with very strong opinions, someone mentioned the new Batman movie, and he looked for a second like visually, viscerally disgusted even mentioning it, and took like a few seconds to linger on the word horrible mentioning that movie. And then it just looked like something horribly nasty he had just stepped in, or like the memory of someone like vomiting on him, like just disgust. And at the time, I was still trying to convince myself I liked this movie, so I kind of took it personally and thought he went too far. Anyway, now I know exactly how he felt, because that is in fact the right reaction to The Dark Knight Rises. This is a terrible movie.
Yeah,
no holds barred.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the worst movies we have talked about on this show. Anyway, that's that. So, stuff. What have you been up to, Sean?
Like nothing really new. I'm very close to the end of Neo 2. That game is still fantastic. Yeah, I think the thing I'm kind of most surprised and like pleased by with Neo 2 at this point is just like I expect like the gameplay and stuff to be fantastic because it is. But I am like really kind of enjoying the story in that side of the game more and more the deeper it goes on, because I think it has just such a cool, fun take on Sengoku era Japan, and it is this thing of where I just know so much more about that period than I did when I played the first game, that like I feel like I'm understanding more of what the story is doing, because obviously, the American education system doesn't teach you. The American education system barely teaches you about American history. It doesn't teach you anything about Japanese history. So like the Japanese audience would know exactly who like most of the historical figures they're bringing up are, because they're a lot of the people who kind of turned Japan into, instead of a series of sort of separated small kind of nation states all on the same island, into a unified single nation. But I didn't know all that stuff in detail when I played the first game. So I think the way Neo as a franchise, because a lot of the stuff that Neo 2 does is stuff that in retrospect Neo 1 was doing. I just didn't have the context to actually appreciate it. I think it plays with history in fun ways. And now that I think I'm in like the second to last region or whatever the game, I'm getting pretty close to the end. That stuff is very good. But overall, I've just been having a great time playing Neo 2, and then the rest of my time has just been preparing for the Gundam Age podcast for next week. So that's been basically all my free time.
Yeah, I actually have not been playing video games at all lately, other than sometimes when I'm watching some TV. I will grab my Nintendo Switch and play a little bit of like Tetris or Mario Golf. But like, I have not played any. I have not turned on my PS5 once, except for this morning. I went to check something in Genshin Impact. I have not been playing games. I've been doing this class that I've been telling you guys about, this Japanese class, and I've been watching a lot of stuff. I've been watching Gundam Age. I finished the first arc today, and we're talking about the first 2 arcs on next week's show, on the next Weekly Suit Gundam plug. And I've been watching a lot of movies to plan for some of my fall classes that I'm teaching, including this series that I've been telling you guys about, the screening series I'm doing on giant robots, that I still can't believe they're letting me do. And I have 1 week I'm still trying to program because I keep going through things and going, not quite there, not quite there. But I've been trying a lot of different things and thinking about it. So yeah, it's that one's a little bit of a puzzle, but I've been watching a lot of stuff for that. And you know what? It's been nice. It's been nice. I've been having a good time away from games. I've been reading a lot. Zelda Skyward Sword comes out at the end of this next week, so I will be playing that when it comes out. But for now, I'm just on a break and doing other stuff, and I'm perfectly happy with that. It's nice to step away from games sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
That was like I'm feeling the opposite with Neo 2, where that's what I had felt like for a long time at the end of me working the semester, was like, man, I just don't have time to do anything with video game stuff. And then that ended, and I was like, well, now I have time to actually play some video games I wanted to play.
Yeah.
So yes, the taking breaks and then coming back, it's good to kind of like pace it that way.
One of the movies I watched, I have 2 I wanted to mention really quick that I've been watching for this Giant Robots class. One of which is a firm, it's not going in the class, and one of which might be. The one that is not is I'm trying to figure out something that will represent Super Sentai, because I feel like that's like one of the like pillars, because it's got giant robots and shit. And like people know it vaguely because of Power Rangers. So one of the things I watched was the new Power Rangers movie from a couple years ago, just to see like, because some people like that movie for whatever reason. I don't know why, because there's no Power Ranger stuff in it for 90 minutes out of a 2-hour movie. They don't like they get the thing at like the 30-minute mark, and I think, okay, this, and I kind of like the first half hour because I like the kids in it. They're like good teen actors and they're fun characters, and like, okay, you got that. That buys you a lot of rope with a Power Rangers thing, is if I like the kids. And then they just keep not being Power Rangers for 90 fucking minutes, and you don't see them in the suits, like in the get-ups, until 91 minutes into the movie, and it's just the final action scene is Power Ranger stuff. And even then, for most of that, they do the Hollywood thing where they just have the helmets off so you could just see their faces. Why make a movie if you're embarrassed about what the movie is? Like, it honestly, the movie it most reminded me of is the original Fantastic Four. It's worse than that, but like, you know how in that Fantastic Four movie, like, they get the powers early on, but they don't do anything with them until like the very end of the movie because they're just hanging around in the apartment, like doing sitcom stuff. It's like that. It's like, it's very embarrassed to be this thing, so it is doing whatever it can do to not be the thing. It's just like, I know it's called Power Rangers, but we don't want to do any Power Ranger stuff because we might scare people away. So we're going to wait until the very end of the movie and do a little bit, and then we'll be done. Utterly baffling. One of the most baffling movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, that just feels like a general trend with Hollywood and dealing with a lot of this stuff, is like both the being embarrassed about it and then also the like creating this like way overwrought, overdone story where you don't actually have the premise of whatever the movie is happen until the beginning of the third act, and it's like, that always sucks. Like, that's always.
Hey, we're
going
to talk about one of those today.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is. It's terrible. It's bad. It was depressing. Then I watched King Kong Escapes, which is the 1967 Japanese, kind of a Japanese-American co-production. It's an interesting one in that sense, but it's by Ishiro Honda. And it is the Toho King Kong movie where he fights Mecha Kong, or Robo Kong, as they call him in English. And that's one I'm considering. And I might show it. My only worry is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, I have no qualms. I think that will go over like gangbusters with a crowd because it's fucking nuts and it's like really well paced. King Kong Escapes is very slow in the middle, and I enjoy it. I just don't know how much rope I want to give the students. But I'm considering it. That is an entertaining movie. That's when I wound up watching the English version of, because there's no good version of the Japanese cut out there. And it kind of doesn't matter, because that one, the protagonist is white American dude who dubbed himself. So in Japanese, you're actually also watching dubbed for all that stuff, but it's just reverse dubbed. But it's an interesting movie. The King Kong suit from the Toho movies is so terrible, but I love it.
Yes.
And Mechanic Kong is very fun. So
it's hey, there's many kaiju movies as you could show. That'll get my support.
I'm considering a lot of stuff. I know Godzilla vs. Megalon is the one with Jet Jaguar, right?
Yes.
Is that a good one? Should I think about that one? Is that one something you think people would enjoy?
That one is like very, very, very goofy. Like even more so than Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. It's like, and that's one where like if you wanted to get something that hits some of that Super Sentai type stuff, that's the kind of robot that Jet Jaguar is. He does like the poses and then grows really big and that kind of thing. Although I say he grows really big, obviously what they then do is just have him on a set with a man in a Godzilla suit. And it's just the exact same costume. It's just you have tiny fake trees instead of him standing next to real normal-sized trees. But yeah, like I enjoy Godzilla vs. Megalon a lot. And it is like super campy, over-the-top ridiculous. And I do think it would avoid some of those problems of like the pacing stuff of King Kong, because it has more of that sort of mid to late 70s Godzilla energy where it just kind of like moves and moves and moves, and the plot and characters are kind of whatever, but it's got good dumb music and shit like that.
It's one of those problems too of like so much of this and so much of the problem of programming something like this is not trying to is balancing and pace and repetitiveness and stuff.
Yeah.
So like the wall I keep running into is if I'm showing Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, there's a lot of stuff that I don't want to show because it's similar enough but not that good. And like,
I don't think I would do both Mechagodzilla and Megalon. Yeah,
that's my thought. I haven't seen all of Megalon, but I put in the Criterion disc last night and watched a bunch of scenes, including, the ending is phenomenal with the Jet Jaguar song and everything.
Yeah.
But like, it was like, this is the problem here is that Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla frankly does most of this better. So like, it doesn't have Jet Jaguar, who is special, and I think it's weird they've never done like a Jet Jaguar solo movie or anything. But although he is in the new anime. Have you seen that? The Netflix one?
Yes, I haven't watched the anime, but I've watched the trailers because it only finished its run a couple weeks ago, and then my anime time has been Gundam Age. Yes, I'm very excited to get to it.
Yeah, maybe we'll have to do an episode on that. It looks fun, and Jet Jaguar, like she showed up in the trailer, and I'm like, well, now I have to watch this. Jet Jaguar is cool, and he's got his own song. Not everyone gets their own song. Him, King Caesar, it's great. King Caesar gets a 5-minute song in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, King Caesar gets like the full thing. He gets the full second verses in there. You think like most of the times in the movies they cut out the second verse, but not like a Godzilla because it knows what you want.
Yes. So anyway, this is all stuff I'm looking at. I did finally find an actual Japanese Super Sentai movie the other night that I was able to get a torrent of, and that is my next step. Like a feature-length one. Most of the Super Sentai movies are like Toei Festival, like 20-minute things.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, it's a weird world to be wading through. Everything else is locked down. It's this 1 week I'm trying to program in the middle of this thing. But I'm having a lot of fun with it, and it's going to be a good series, and I'll let you guys know more about that when it's coming up. Anyway, that's my stuff. Do you want to hit some news, Sean?
Yeah, what's going on in the news, Jonathan?
Well, the big news this week was that Nintendo made a kind of out-of-nowhere announcement the other day of the Nintendo Switch OLED edition, and it is called the Nintendo Switch parentheses OLED edition end parentheses, that will be releasing on my birthday, October 8th. It's the same dimensions and internals as the current Nintendo Switch normal model, not the Lite. But it will have a 7-inch OLED screen that is bigger than the current screen because they're basically removing the bezels. It has a much improved kickstand. The new kickstand is essentially the same thing as on a Microsoft Surface tablet, where you have kind of infinite angles you can lay it at. It'll have improved onboard speakers, and it will have a wired LAN port on the dock for Ethernet. But those are that you can literally count. Those are the 4 differences: is the OLED screen, the speakers, the kickstand, and the LAN port. It is not a Nintendo Switch Pro. It does not have 4K. It does not do enhanced performance. It's the exact same thing inside. It's just a boost to these other things. It'll cost $350. That is $50 over the normal Switch model. It is coming October 8th. And this made the internet very mad because apparently they were promised by Shigeru Miyamoto himself a Nintendo Switch Pro with 4K and everything else, and it would be as powerful as a PS5, but on the Switch. And people were very mad that Miyamoto lied to them, even though no one at Nintendo ever promised you that.
Yeah, so this was the culmination of the long ongoing saga of different reports and rumors. With I think the thing that's interesting is that 90% of what this thing is exactly what the Bloomberg report from what is I think almost a year ago now said. Like the OLED stuff, it costing more. A lot of those features were things that were in there. The other thing that report said was that it would be targeting some kind of 4K support something. And that was not, there's no real specifics there. And then further rumors would come out about them looking at more modern NVIDIA chips that would then be able to support DLSS. And people were like, okay, so that would be the 4K thing. And yeah, I think I think it is fair enough for people to be disappointed that if you are bummed out about bad frame rates or something in some of your Switch games and you wanted a better Switch, it's fair enough to be bummed out. But it's also, you're Nintendo never said anything about any other models of the Switch. They didn't even tease this announcement at all. This was just a random drop on a Tuesday morning or whatever. The thing that Nintendo loves to do is just yeah, fuck it, here's just a trailer, I don't know. And so yeah, it's this thing where I think it's fair to be bummed if you want a better Switch, but also Nintendo never told you that they were going to make a better Switch. And I think it's still a distinct possibility that within a year or two there might be something that is that. I think the how accurate a lot of the reporting was around what this thing is outside of the 4K thing makes me think that there's a distinct possibility that there might be a second model, and that information got compressed in the reporting into one model instead of being two.
Yeah, I'm frustrated because I always thought, and you can look through my Twitter history and see that I am not lying here, that this was a weird idea. That this wasn't not that this would never happen, just that in the time frame that kept being suggested, the idea of Nintendo cannibalizing a product this successful at this moment with basically a Switch Pro or a Switch 2, it wasn't clear what it was going to be, is fucking weird. The Nintendo Switch is currently coming off of its highest selling year ever. It's the extraordinarily rare console that in its fourth year, I don't know if that's ever happened, had its highest selling year. There is no reason for them to be doing the PS4 Pro approach from a sales standpoint. Absolutely none. They cannot keep the normal version on shelves. You do that kind of thing when you are wanting to goose your sales, not when you are on fire and can't keep the normal thing in stock. Especially then in this last year, once we had all the chip shortages and all of that, and the PS5 and Series X can't make enough to keep up with demand. I just continue, and also the whole idea of Switch building a product around 4K and improved power performance and stuff is just so Nintendo's never gestured in that direction. I understand they did the new Nintendo 3DS, but people need to understand what the new Nintendo 3DS was not the PS4 Pro. It was modestly more powerful in some ways. Mainly it had a better CPU and could do a little more stuff on that end. But the difference was it could run Super NES games on emulation and the old 3DS couldn't. It was not this massive thing that was very, very different. It was still mostly cosmetic improvements, the way this sort of thing is, and the way all of Nintendo's handhelds have historically been upgraded. So they never did a Wii HD. They never did the Wii U 4K. That's just not a thing Nintendo does. I agree that they are I don't think those reports were lying from Bloomberg. I am sure Nintendo is prototyping all that stuff because everybody does stuff like that. Yeah. Sony is prototyping the PS6 right now, probably. That's how this stuff works. But it wasn't going to happen right away. And I think a lot of the stuff people were hoping for was also just was beyond what the reports were even indicating, was totally unreasonable. Because the 4K thing also, it wasn't going to be a magical 4K 60 device. It was going to be a better NVIDIA chip that could do DLSS, which is basically AI driven 4K enhancements.
Yeah,
which,
basically what DLSS is that it is an AI driven kind of super sampling process that the game is still rendering at whatever 720p, whatever the internal rendering is. And so most of the processes and the resources of the technical resources into rendering the game is just rendering it at that resolution, and then the hardware on the chip then allows this AI to take that image and using AI reconstruct it into something that looks closer to a 4K type or whatever their target like upscaling target is, a more 4K-esque image. So it would be cheaper to render, but it would produce a much, much better looking image, which this is like very new technology, like new enough that the PS5 and the Xbox Series X couldn't take advantage of something like that because NVIDIA only has had that for about a year or two, and AMD has only, I think, just now put out chips that have their kind of version of what DLSS is.
Yeah. And also just, I think there's a lot of, in the reporting and like people being disappointed, misunderstanding of what Nintendo's business is. I am looking, Sean, right now at a list of the top 20 best-selling Switch games so far. Of those top 20, there are 2 third-party games. One is Among Us, which runs fine. You do not need anything special to run Among Us. And the other is Monster Hunter Rise, which it would be nice to have like a 4K 60 version of that, but the Switch can't do that, and I don't think the proposed Switch Pro, maybe you could do DLSS 4K. You're not going to get that running at 60. That game will also be on PC next year, and probably other systems because it's a timed exclusive. And of all the Nintendo first-party games in those top 20, the only one that has any performance issues to note, and they have been ironed out, or sorry, there's 2, is Breath of the Wild, and those have mostly been ironed out over time. That game runs at a fine 30 unless you're in the Kokoro Forest once in a while. And then Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, which is just way too like ambitious for the system. But like all the other ones, the resolution is fine. The frame rate is fine. I don't see anything that would be gained from even moving most of these games into 4K, like Mario Kart 8, Smash Bros., Pokemon, Mario Odyssey. These all look great on the TV. I have a 4K display. They look totally fine because of Nintendo's art style. Like, resolution is not the most important thing to a lot of these games. So, like, if that's your top-selling games, and then your bread and butter is a lot of indie stuff, just like, I don't know, the hobbyist focus on like 4K and 60 FPS and all this stuff, which I love, is not Nintendo's ball game here. So it's just there was a real sense of fan entitlement in the reaction to this of like, why didn't you give me a PS5 but in the size of an iPad? And I'm like, because that's impossible, and also Nintendo doesn't care about that. And it was a little annoying to me. I think this product is a little weird. I'm not entirely sure who it's for, because I do think if you are savvy enough to know about and be excited about an OLED screen, you probably do want some of those boosted internals and stuff, and you probably already own a Switch. So I'm not entirely sure who this is for. Other than people who haven't bought a Switch yet, this is obviously the one you should get. It's better. And if your Switch is old and you feel like upgrading, or you're someone who primarily plays handheld, this is a nice upgrade and stuff. But, like, it's kind of whatever. I don't really care either way. And then I got really annoyed at the fan, like, pushback on this, because it came from such a place of, like, entitlement and non-reality to me.
Yeah, like, the online reaction was dumb as ever, where it's just the thing where people take rumors, they spin them, they take like what is legitimate reporting, they then take a bunch of rumors about that legitimate reporting, spin those out of control, get into a big frenzy about it, and yes, it's ridiculous online. But I do want to talk about a little bit, because I do think that the product itself is weird, and it does feel like Nintendo, like, why is this thing $350? Like, the Switch is 4 years old. The Switch, I mean, so obviously from Nintendo's point of view, they're still selling it super well. From their point of view, they don't need to price drop it. From like a consumer point of view, though, like from my point of view, it's like, that's not a device that is worth $300 to me. Because, I mean, the Xbox Series S is $300, right? Like, this OLED model of the Switch is $50 less expensive than the digital PS5. And it is a very, I mean, I'm sure the OLED screen is a nice improvement because OLED screens are nice, but it's overall a fairly modest upgrade in that regard for a device that should have been price dropped already. And I think it's like weird that what it feels like they're doing, because I'm assuming that this is going to be what the Switch is within a year. Like, this feels to me like they are phasing out the classic style Switch, because this thing is basically the PS4 Slim or whatever of the Switch. It is the mid-console refresh where your manufacturing processes have advanced and parts have changed in such a way that I'm willing to bet it is cheaper for them to make this OLED Switch than it was to make the original Switch, because of different ways that the processing and the manufacturing will be more efficient 4 years later, and updating some of those parts to make them cheaper. And yet, what they are doing is stealth price increasing the Switch by $50 instead of making it so that the original Switch is $250 or $200 or whatever, and selling out and pushing out all that stock. Somehow they are now like making the Switch a more expensive console than it was, and that is like really weird to me.
It is really weird, but like it's an unprecedented device in its like success and where it is in its cycle, where its fourth year was like it, so the Switch has sold 90 million units so far, and 30 million of those were in the last year. So a third of its sales came in one of 4 years. And again, it is still, they're having trouble keeping it on shelves. So, you know, most systems, it would make sense to do a price drop by now. I can't think of another system that didn't have a price drop 4 years into its lifespan. Like, literally, I'm running through in my head all the ones in my lifetime, and I've bought every Nintendo system. I know they have. And yeah, normally you would have that. So it is really, like, I feel like if COVID hadn't happened, and like a lot of things would be different in the world, one of which would be the Switch probably wouldn't have had that crazy fourth year boost. It probably would still be selling well, but it probably wouldn't have done that much. And then it feels like this product, this would be $300. The normal Switch would drop to $250 or $200. The Switch Lite might make a small decrease, but they would discontinue the original Switch, and this would be the new one, in exactly what you're describing with like slim PS4 and that kind of stuff. But instead, well, you're not going to drop the price on something that's selling out anyway. So I guess we have to sell this for more, because if we sell it for the same, that's weird. It's a weird situation. It's obviously Nintendo is a company and they're greedy and all of that stuff. But it's also like, it's why this whole thing is just kind of bizarre to me. Like, that they're doing a new version anyway right now. It's all very bizarre, and I don't know what their long-term plans are. I'm sure, like, there will be a Switch 2. This is clearly what Nintendo's going to do going forward for the immediate future anyway. It's just there's no need to do it right now, and so then this comes in at this weird price point. And yeah, it is, stealthily, it is a $50 price increase to a device 4 years into its lifespan. But yeah, who the hell knows what's going on?
Yeah. I also do wish that they were, like, that there were more elements to this redesign that, like, made it more attractive to someone who would someone like myself who would basically never use the Switch handheld. It's just not really how I play games traditionally. And so, like, the LAN adapter is nice, I guess. But like, anyone who wanted to be able to connect their Ethernet to the Switch, you could just get like a USB adapter for like $5 or something.
That's what I did. I have it. It's sitting in my Switch right now. It's a little unwieldy, but like it works fine. I have to.
It's the Nintendo console. Like, how much are you really going to play that thing online, anyways?
Yeah, it is not. It is. They're all small improvements. The OLED thing is fairly big if you're using it handheld, but I agree, Sean, there is no Switch model like sort of specifically targeted at like your situation. Like, the Lite is the opposite. The Lite is targeted at the people who only play handheld, which there are plenty of. And then the normal Switch is that nice balance. And then this one is sort of like that balance tilting towards handheld because of the OLED screen, which might honestly look nicer than a lot of people's TVs when they're playing these games, right? So there is no version of the Switch that is like focused on the docked experience, because this docked is identical to this current Switch. There's no difference whatsoever.
Yeah, and Digital Foundry had a pretty good video kind of talking a little bit about like that there are some like simple things that Nintendo could do, either in terms of with improved heating, they could overclock, because like when the Switch is in its docked mode, like the reason why it has better performance is that it runs its GPU and a CPU at a higher clock, but even the higher clock it runs that CPU and GPU at is not the normal clock for those chips. Basically, like if you had the exact same hardware in your laptop, it would run at a higher clock than what the Switch does. So it's like with improved heating and ventilation, which it seems like the dock itself, the new dock actually does still have. There's no indication from Nintendo at all, and I think if there was, they were going to do this, they would have said that that there would be some amount of increase in performance in docked mode purely just from them running that stuff at a normal or slightly overclocked performance profile, which it seems like they would easily be able to do. And then the other thing that seems silly to me is that what I always thought the 4K Switch thing was, because that always just seemed like complete horseshit to me. It was like the Switch regularly seems to run games at 720 to 900p even in a docked mode. Like the jump to 4K is so huge. They're not like most companies wouldn't even make an upgrade that big. Nintendo certainly wouldn't give a shit about it. But the thing that they can do is have it send a 4K signal. It doesn't have to render the game at 4K. You render the game at the same whatever the resolution is. You just send a 4K signal and have it play nicer with more modern TV technology. Maybe you throw HDR in there, which would be something they can do without changing the internals in any meaningful way. That kind of stuff to make it just sort of like a slightly more modern device. And this is some of the stuff that like Digital Foundry talks about more in detail in their video. But that is another thing that like, as someone who like is in the market, like would be interested in the Switch, and I was kind of hoping about the Switch Pro thing, thinking if this is real, I might actually pick one of these up because I would want something that I felt was worth its money, that I was only ever going to really play on my TV, and like they just don't feel like they have a device that like fits that, and it seems like there are small things they could do to make that a lot more attractive.
Yeah, no, totally. And that would actually be more in the new Nintendo 3DS range of things, because that's what the new Nintendo 3DS sort of did, was for people who like it made the 3D better, and it made a lot of like the user experience was better because of the improved CPU. The entire firmware ran better, and that mattered a lot. Like those kind of things would be nice. It is weird. The Nintendo Switch's UI is 720p on a 4K TV, and it's very blurry. There's stuff like that they could fix. But yeah, I don't know. It's weird. You know, I still look, I love my Nintendo Switch. It's a great system. I heartily recommend it, and I think of the systems that are on the market right now, it's the one I would recommend to most people, bar none. But I do understand, like, what you're saying, Sean, and I do think I said at the front, this is a weird product that I'm not entirely sure who it's for, because I love my Switch and I have zero plans on getting this thing. So it's
it's like even somehow Nintendo, which is like Nintendo is the classic double dipper company, right? They put out their little refreshes and stuff to get people to buy the same basic thing like 5 fucking times. And even they somehow, like the way they're doing this, they are not getting that market.
Well, it's kind of weird, Sean, because I mean, fuck, I have my Game Boy SP right here on my desk because I was doing something with it the other day, and this is still, I think, maybe the best upgrade they've ever done was from the Game Boy Advance to the SP. So, but I remember that I had a Game Boy Advance and I got the SP because the SP had the backlit screen and everything. It was actually it was front lit at first. I have the unit now that's got a backlit light on it, but great system. Nintendo DS, DS Lite was a great improvement. I never went beyond the DS Lite. There was the DSi and the DSi XL, but I got the DS Lite. 3DS, I had 3DS, 3DS XL, and the new Nintendo 3DS XL. All of those, loved those. I still have my 3DS XL over here. I use it from time to time. It's great. But the Switch, I still have the Switch I got on day one. You know, I've never upgraded that thing, and I've never felt the need. Like, there is the standard model has a better battery now. They're going to have this OLED one. There's the Lite. But it's just, it was what I wanted, and it's never really changed. So it is kind of a weird situation where they've done a little bit of it feels like, because the Switch Lite was not a double dip unit, I don't think. That was for a different...
No, that was like the 2DS, basically.
Yeah.
Like, it's a much cheaper unit that is made for a different market than what the basic unit is.
Right. And then I guess this is sort of a double dip thing, but I don't really care about it that much. So,
yeah.
Who knows? It's weird. Anything else to say about Nintendo being Nintendo?
Nintendo gonna Nintendo.
Yes, they are. And people on the internet gonna people on the internet.
Yes.
Briefly, Jason Schreier broke news this week that Assassin's Creed is sort of changing its model, And in response, Ubisoft, like, timed with his like news article, did a press release about this, where they announced Assassin's Creed Infinity as their next big Assassin's Creed project. And what it is basically is a cross-studio collaboration where you will have Jonathan Dumont and Clint Hawking sharing leadership as creative directors, overseeing their teams at Ubisoft Quebec and Ubisoft Montreal. And they will be working across the different studios on one Assassin's Creed platform going forward. In their press release, they said the change means we're evolving with the industry. The pandemic and working from home have fundamentally changed the way we produce games, giving us a moment to reflect on our organization. Assassin's Creed was born within Ubisoft Montreal, and the studio built an incredible foundation for the franchise before Ubisoft Quebec then took the lead with Syndicate and Odyssey, demonstrating its ability to drive the franchise even further. Rather than continuing to pass the baton from game to game, we profoundly believe this is an opportunity for one of Ubisoft's most beloved franchises to evolve in a more integrated and collaborative manner that's less centered on studios and more focused on talent and leadership wherever they are within Ubisoft. So that is sort of the goal for this thing that is very early in its life cycle.
Yeah.
They would not have told us anything about this if it weren't for Jason Schreier doing his thing. What do you think about this news, Sean? I think it's an interesting development.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like something that I'm kind of surprised that Ubisoft had not done this already, because this is very much what they have been doing since like halfway through the PS4 generation. They, with a couple of games, I think probably Rainbow Six Siege was the big one, they hit into this like service model thing that was extremely, and like was and continues to be extremely lucrative for them. And Assassin's Creed was always this thing that like came about before they hit this service thing, right? Assassin's Creed was near the very beginning of the 360 PS3 generation. Very successful franchise that is focused on single player stuff. And then they did their like multiplayer modes, which some of those were actually pretty interesting. But it never quite fit into the service model-y thing that Ubisoft has pushed towards with games like Rainbow Six Siege, The Division, what they've done with like Ghost Recon, everything else they're doing. I'm blanking on the name, but you've got like the medieval fucking sword game that they still keep on putting out DLC for Honored. That one. They have so many games that they do that with, and Assassin's Creed is like the poster child of modern Ubisoft, but it never quite fit into that model. Every time they've tried multiplayer stuff, which was moderately which was fun to play, but I don't think ever really made sense from a service perspective. They put service model-y type stuff into Origins, and I assume Odyssey had it as well with like time-limited quests and boss fights and stuff, but that never really made sense, and it never fit the game quite right. And then they have their DLC packs that they continue to support the games with. This seems to be a way to just kind of take. I think the ideal is, if it works well, I think there's a really good version of this that takes the idea of Assassin's Creed, which is the standalone fun single-player adventures that go through exotic and interesting periods in history that you don't usually visit in video games, and get to tell those stories and have those like episodes and chunks, and put it into a framework that supports that better, instead of having to make a 200-hour epic RPG every year or two, which is just not sustainable, because that's what they've been trying to do since Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, and I don't think that's sustainable from an audience perspective. I know Valhalla sold really well for them, but I think that also a lot of old school Assassin's Creed people like me just can't keep up with the franchise at that pace. So I think they would end up exhausting their audience really quickly that way. And then from a studio development perspective, there's no way they could continue to put out games at that pace like that. So
I think it sounds like a good idea. Like, there are definitely ways it can go wrong.
Uh-huh.
No doubt about that. But I think the potential of an ongoing sort of service, the Destiny or Genshin Impact kind of thing, where you log on and then maybe the first world is your pirate thing, and then eventually they're going to add in a Viking thing, or I'm using like old Assassin's Creed, but whatever it would be. And they're not 200-hour packs. They're like focused, and like you could come in and out, almost like kind of like what Hitman tried, in a certain sense. And maybe even add some like multiplayer components into the world, because I think that can be done in Assassin's Creed without ruining what the thing is. I think it would be delicate, but I think you could do it. And then having the teams, I like what they said in their press release, and I know they're trying to make it sound good, but I do think it's true. in a world where we're now discovering working from home and some of these things in the game industry, there's a lot that could... I like the idea of having the teams work together, you know? And not having them break their backs with these 200-hour-long games that, like, you and I know are in the same boat where we want to play more of these Assassin's Creed games, and it's not possible. Like, I played Origins, and I liked it. I played Odyssey, and I really enjoyed what I played of Odyssey, but I played like 40 hours of Odyssey and didn't make a fucking dent in that thing. And then eventually fell off and did other stuff. And then Valhalla came out right around the new consoles, and it was just we were too busy. And like Valhalla sells on sale a lot, and I keep almost buying it. And then I go, but when am I going to play this? It's like 200 hours long. When the fuck will I find time to play Assassin's Creed Valhalla? And I think something like what they're suggesting with Infinity just seems more sustainable from every possible level. Again, if it's done well, there are ways to fuck it up, but I feel like that's a bridge to cross when we come to it. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it makes me more excited for the future of Assassin's Creed than I had been, of where I feel like Origins is such a fucking great game, and it felt like they had landed on a really great model. And I think there's an alternate future where they had continued on the Origins model, but those games came out every 3 to 4 years, not every year or every 2 years, which was just like I was flabbergasted when they announced Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And like, how did you make this game, and how do you how do you expect me to play it? Like, I never ended up finishing Assassin's Creed Origins, even though I loved that game, because it was just so long and other games came out and I kind of fell off of it. And I think about it every once in a while about like, man, I should get back into that game. Like, it's one of those, I have a couple of games that I ended up falling off that, like, in the back of my head, I like try to always remember where was I and kind of vaguely what I was doing. So because I've never fucking started that game from the beginning again. That's not happening. That like, I know exactly where I was and where I was heading and what I was going to do. I was going to the gladiatorial arena place, and it's like, I've kept that in my mind for a long time. So it's like, eventually I want to play some more of that game. But this is just such a better model than what they were trying to do with it. Or it can't.
Also, here's one of the other problems with that is that Origins was great, but not a perfect game. And then Odyssey was a bigger version of that because it came out a year later, had basically the same systems. And so, like, it did have slightly improved combat, no doubt about that. But, like, it wasn't enough to feel like, you know, like, what you want is, like, a jump between, like, a Mass Effect 2 to a Mass Effect 3. Yes. Not, like, if Mass Effect 3 came out and it was just identical to 2. No, I mean, this is a weird comparison because 2 was perfect, and I think 3 tinkered and made it worse. But, like, you know what I mean, Sean, right?
Yes.
Like, a games that come out...
You want, here's an example with the game that I'm playing, you want the Neo 2 to Neo 1.
Exactly.
That takes all the stuff that was good and makes smart cuts and strong improvements to what it did and shores up its flaws. Like, you want that kind of solid incremental upgrade rather than... And this is the same thing that, like, Call of Duty is like this, only, like, worse, where, like, you end up taking steps backwards for sometimes with that franchise because you have a totally different studio that's been working on a game for 2 to 3 years, and it doesn't have all the stuff that you had in Modern Warfare, the new one, that was so great. And so it's like, you end up, like me, it's like, I love Call of Duty Modern Warfare, you know, barring some of the stuff, the story is awful, but that game was super fun to play. And it's like, I was never even tempted by Black Ops Cold War ever since I played the beta, because I'm like, this doesn't have all the good shit that the new one had, because of course it didn't, because that was new stuff that Treyarch couldn't have possibly used in the game that came out a year later.
Well, here's my question for you, Sean. When does Call of Duty do this? Because, like, it would be harder for Call of Duty because they've frankly bifurcated the audience, where you've got, like, Black Ops fans and Modern Warfare fans, and there is a Venn diagram overlap, but, like, I do suspect there are, like, actual different fan bases. But, like, Call of Duty, I don't know if you've seen this lately, Sean, but, like, if you launch Call of Duty Modern Warfare, it is the Warzone launcher. Yeah. It is integrated with Black Ops, and it's got, like, the Black Ops menu and stuff there. Even if you don't own it or have it downloaded, it'll, like, prompt you to get it. But it's like, if you had both, they're all in one launcher, basically, which is super confusing. And, like, that game on Xbox, at least, is basically unplayable now because of the amount of, like, installations and, like, different pieces, and, like, it's very confusing. I can't play the game right now. I can get into that at some point, but it's, like, broken. But, like, it seems like something they're kind of trying to do because they realized, like, oh shit, Warzone was a hit and Call of Duty Modern Warfare was so big. Clearly they shouldn't have made a new game the year after Modern Warfare, because Modern Warfare was chugging along just fine. But the train was already moving, so they did it, and so now it's in this awkward position. This feels like something Call of Duty should be thinking about.
Yeah, it is honestly like it is a thing. I think most annual franchises in games probably it makes sense, like your sports games and stuff like that. It makes sense to transition to this service model. Like there's a lot of things about the service model stuff that I think has hurt a lot of, especially the Western game development side of things. But there are a lot of advantages to that model for a lot of types of games. And I think, yes, I think this Assassin's Creed idea is really interesting. I hope what it means is that it fuels like good, mostly single player focused, smaller, bite sized Assassin's Creed chunks. If that's what they do, this is a great idea. And yeah, I think having Call of Duty as a platform, or having Madden as a platform, or FIFA, or like any of those kinds of ongoing franchises, it just makes more sense. Rather than having a player roster update every year or whatever they do with sports games.
Yeah, definitely. So, interesting glimpse into the future of gaming. Speaking of the future, Sean,
yes.
We got a preview of Genshin Impact's version 2.0. New
yes,
continent, new characters.
An update so big, Jonathan, that they're skipping 1.8 and 1.9 because the game is currently on 1.7, which was the summer update. And they're like, nah, fuck that shit. We're going to Japan / Inazuma because yes, version 2.0, which will be coming out July 21st, is going to be the first half of the Inazuma content. They're basically splitting it, I think, the same way Liyue was split at the 1.0 launch, whereas basically half of what it was, like the story and all of that. Yeah, we're getting our first big new continent update, which is super exciting.
Super exciting. I did boot up Genshin Impact for the first time in quite a while today because I did have to tear myself away from that game a little bit earlier this year because it was eating up too much of my life. But I will dive back in for this. It looks very good. And I gotta tell you, Sean, the thing I'm most excited for in this update? Cross progression.
Yes.
That is awesome. I love that because Genshin Impact is available everywhere. But if you played it on PS4 or PS5, you could only have your stuff on that system. I always wanted the ability to like boot it on my iPhone while I'm out, or like my iPad is powerful and runs the game very well. It would be great to like, maybe I'm going out of town and I want to play Genshin Impact. I don't have to bring my fucking PS5 with me, and I'll be able to do progress on that. That's awesome. That is such a cool update, and we're getting a new continent and 3 new characters and all that stuff. It's a big thing they're doing.
Yeah, it's a big update. There's a lot of stuff in it. There's like a huge 6-minute trailer that they showed that goes through some of the new characters, and they're bringing back the tower defense thing that was in the Liyue Festival.
Oh, I love
bringing
that.
that back and updating that. I'm very excited for that because that was super fun. There also is currently in the game they have, and I actually haven't played it because I'm kind of intentionally waiting until the new update's closer. But they have a prologue sort of chapter or whatever for Chapter 2, which is confusing because Mondstadt is technically the prologue of the game. Chapter 1 of the game is Liyue, so Chapter 2 is Inazuma, and so there's hey, this is where kind of they're building to you going to Inazuma, and that's with the new character Kuzuha, or Kaza, I think his name is, comes up in that. So there's they just added that a few days ago or a week ago at this point.
I'll have to check what that is because I was looking at what story stuff I had in my journal, and I started something today that was I think it was a Chapter 1 thing, but I don't know what it was. Yeah. But
because I think because I think when you started falling off, there might still be the last chunk of the kind of transition where they do some more of the Dainsleif stuff, because they added another one of those. I think maybe you hadn't done that yet. And that is there's some big plot stuff that happens there. But
that's the stuff that's always at the top of your quest list, right?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, the main ones that aren't the world quests or whatever. There is also, if you haven't played in a while, there is a world quest you should do where they have added in an entire player housing system into the game that is Sims-esque, where you go into an alternate dimension thingy. You get this item that allows you to transport to a little realm where you can build items and have houses and decorate it and put characters in there. Genshin Impact is a fucking crazy game that has every video game. It is crazy. They've added so much, so you should look for that quest as well. There's a lot of good stuff in there. The thing, though, Jonathan, that I am both most excited for and most terrified about this new update is if you watch that trailer, they show very briefly a character in it, Bale, which is the god of Inazuma. Presumably she's going to have another name that is not the god name, like Morax is actually Zhongli for Liyue. But you get a couple of voiced lines from her in the trailer, and she is voiced by Miyuki Swashiro.
Oh my
the
god.
world's greatest voice actress and person. And she's a dope samurai lightning sword lady
Holy
who
fuck.
is the lightning goddess. Yeah.
So this is the one where you are going to spend like $300 real world dollars to get her?
Yeah. I have avoided I think I've only once spent money very early on the game on something that was not the like $5 a month thing, and then twice I've bought the weapon pass or like the battle pass thing just to get, because that just gives you like a billion money
Yes.
and experience things. So I'm like, fuck it, like I'll spend $10 to get all that shit. But I've only, I think, one time spent like money just to like buy packs of gems, and I think this will be like the one exception I'll make for myself. Because I usually just don't do that.
Well,
on these games.
if you start saving now and get all your acquaint
Yes.
fates, like, you will have a really good shot at getting her the first time. So,
Yes.
Everybody start saving. That's what I'm going to do. I have a good number in the game now that were left over, but yeah, I want that too. It's so funny, Sean. You can go find the clip of us saying, when will Miyuki Swashiro be in Genshin Impact? Because wasn't your joke at the end of last year, you tried to give this game your Miyuki Swashiro Award for Peculiar Excellence?
Yes.
And then you were like, nah, but she's not in it, so it'll be a future winner. So it will be this year's winner, right?
Yes. Yeah, almost assuredly. Assuming that, because I'm guessing probably that character will probably, if you're going by like when Zhongli became available in Liyue, that's going to, I'm guessing, be 2.1. So that'll probably be like, probably that will be timed with the first anniversary of the game or sometime around there. I'm guessing is when that character would be available.
So we'll get to know her in the story and everything, but then
Yes.
we won't. Yeah, it'll be cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I want her too. That sounds great. Yeah,
Genshin Impact's great. I'm super excited. To get this big update.
Remind us again when this is coming out.
July 21st. So it's in like a week and a half.
Yeah.
Yep.
Skyward Sword is coming out the 16th, but I can probably finish that pretty fast. All right. Well, anyway, that's all the news. Lots of exciting stuff. There's going to be more. We're going to rev back into Genshin Impact mode probably on this podcast, and I'm sure some of our listeners are like, "Ooh boy," and some of our listeners are rolling their eyes into the back of their heads right now. But that's okay.
Yeah. But people should know I have never revved out of Genshin Impact mode in my life. Like I still
know.
play that game at least 15 minutes every day just to do the dailies and mess around. So I have spared people the unending Genshin Impact talks by making the conscious choices. Like I can't come onto the podcast every single time and talk about Genshin Impact for 30 minutes. It's not reasonable.
This time I did the dailies while listening to this podcast.
Yes,
Yeah.
It has very much become my podcast game.
No,
yes.
totally. I have. That's actually been one thing. I'm actually behind on a bunch of podcasts because I haven't been playing a game. So there you go. I'll jump back into my dailies. All right, Sean. Should we talk some Batman?
Yeah, okay, let's talk about Batman.
All right. That's how I feel about this movie too.
Yeah.
The Dark Knight Rises came out in 2012. All right, I'll talk about it.
Okay.
I already have gotten the Twitter comments from people being like, Jonathan, what do you mean you don't like this movie? I remember you saying nice things about it at the time. Yeah, I know. One, I am 9 years older. I get to be different. And also, when this movie came out, I was 19. Because it was summer 2012. I was still a teenager. I hadn't turned 20 yet. I was a fucking teenager, and I was stupid. All right? And I'm allowed to be stupid as a teenager. And frankly, you have to be a stupid teenager to like this movie because it's bad.
Yes.
It's bad and it's stupid. And at the time, I was full in on these fucking hype cycles. And 2012 was a year where a lot of that changed for me. Because this movie came out in the summer, and then The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey came out in December.
Yeah.
And I learned what disappointment was, all right? 2012 is the year I learned what it was to be disappointed in things. Because I'd never really had that before, you know? I was a kid when the Star Wars prequels came out, and I thought they were good movies, because I was a kid. And then I grew up, and as a teenager, I learned to be, mad about them. And then I got actually older, and I realized they're really good, because they're smart.
Yep.
But with this, look, I was a teenager, these hype cycles, Dark Knight Rises is this fucking, I remember I had this magazine, Empire magazine, where they had this big cover story, and Chris Nolan talking about, like, this is the first epic in Hollywood since Ben-Hur, or whatever fucking shit he said. And, like...
Did he not see the Lord of the Rings movies?
Yeah, I know, yeah, that was my question, too. But anyway, all this stuff, all this hype, and the movie comes out, and I distinctly remember seeing this movie for the first time. One, because I saw it at an IMAX in Minnesota because we were on a road trip, which was kind of cool. It was an IMAX at a zoo where they were showing the movie. It was a cool way to see it. But I remember being in the theater, and I remember sitting through the movie and getting like an hour into the movie and being like, well, this is kind of cool, but when's there going to be a story? And getting like an hour and a half into the movie and being like, okay, the Bane just broke Batman's back. That took a long time. Is there a story now? And then getting to the end and being like, this is kind of stupid. And then getting out of the movie and like being kind of quiet and like trying to figure out like, well, it had to be good. It had to be because it was hyped, right? But I knew in my mind it wasn't good. And I had to talk myself into liking it. And there's an article I did at the time that's like one of my big analytical pieces that is just me in real time trying to talk myself into liking this movie and like sifting through it and being like, this thing that is verifiably dumb in the movie was smart because of this. And then that happened again kind of with The Hobbit later that year, where I had never been more excited for a movie in my life than The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. And I'm sitting in the theater going, this is 3 hours doing 2 chapters of this book. Oh my god! And I don't think that's a bad movie. I think it's a much better movie than
I like Hobbit 1 just fine. That is a decent movie that has a lot of problems, but it's got a lot of good stuff. It is a much better movie than this one.
Much better movie, but it was disappointing because it was not the Lord of the Rings, right?
Oh yes.
And trying to figure out that, and like you can actually trace. I've written about this. The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey is the moment where I personally stopped giving stuff letter grades or star ratings. I think We Got This Covered at the time still made me do it, and I would put in like an arbitrary thing at the end, but like I have never given ratings since 2012 because these 2 movies broke that for me. And honestly, those 2 movies really started a process of me reevaluating my relationship to hype and to thinking about movies and like movies as hype products where you were, and I think you see this if you go back, I was not the only critic talking myself into liking The Dark Knight Rises. I think there are a lot of people who at the time were older and smarter than me who were doing the exact same thing, and I think if they reevaluated it now, they would have the same feeling as me. And I think learning to separate the art from the hype and the product from the art, like there's the art and then there's the product that they're trying to sell you, and sometimes those are 2 different things. And you know, over time I remember like tried to talk myself into liking Dark Knight Rises. I did not revisit it really until a couple years ago when there was this Chris Nolan series at the Denver Film Center where they were playing them all on 35mm, and I watched all of those, and that's when I realized, oh shit, this movie's script is just abysmal, even though its production is somewhat impressive. And then I revisited it for this, and I think this is a thuddingly bad movie. I think this is one of the worst scripts for any Hollywood movie in my lifetime. I think it is an abysmal piece of film writing. It is a good production. It is very nicely mounted. You see every dollar on screen. Chris Nolan is very good at getting his money's worth out of a big budget. It's Wally Feister. It's some of his best work as a cinematographer. It's got good things about it. I think Tom Hardy's Bane is fantastic. I love Tom Hardy in this. But, man alive, I think this is a bad movie, and I especially think now as an adult, it's a bad movie with politics that I find utterly noxiously disgusting. And again, comes back to my thesis I said way at the beginning with Batman Begins, of like, there's been more discussion about are Zack Snyder's Batman movies conservative or fascist or whatever. And I think, like, it is weird that that's where we focus and not on, like, the thing with, as I've said, with the Zack Snyder movies is it's a little confused and all over the place. I don't think the Dark Knight movies are confused and all over the place. They know what they want to say, and what they have to say is utterly fucking toxic. Especially this one.
Yeah. And I agree with all that. Like, to put my relationship with the movie, I think, like, for people to just, like, put it in context, even if you weren't, like, into it at the time, or you were young, or you've forgotten, like, I think one of the things about that hype cycle is that this is not the movie that Christopher Nolan made after The Dark Knight, right? It was the 1-2 punch of Dark Knight and Inception.
Yes.
Inception, a movie that, like, I was fairly cold on at the time. Although, I feel like Inception was the movie I watched that made me realize maybe I don't like Christopher Nolan's movies that much, because everyone was fucking crazy about that movie. And it was that thing where it's like, it's very impressive. It's got a lot of technical stuff that's very impressive, but I cannot feel like in an iota of passion about anything related to that movie. Is just like it's cool. But people fucking lost their minds about that movie. And so that, I think, really built the hype cycle heading into Dark Knight Rises. It's like he did The Dark Knight, the Joker became a cultural phenomenon. He then went on to do Inception, and every trailer has Bromp in it, and people use Inception, and that's like Inception's like impact on culture is the trailer Bwan noise and the people using the word Inception to refer to not what the movie actually uses the word Inception to refer to, but like the scaling and like the relationship of dreams within dreams kind of concept. And that, made this big cultural impact. And now he's coming back to Batman and all this stuff. And he's going to do Bane, but he's going to do Bane the way you want him to do Bane, not the Batman Robin way, which, to be fair, he does Bane a lot fucking better than Batman Robin, for sure. But yeah, I think I remember watching this movie and being pretty just like lukewarm on it. Like I have never gone back and listened to that podcast. I don't usually re-listen to our podcast, and then when I have occasionally listened to our old ones, I come back with an experience of like, I should never do that because I was, as you said, 19 at the time. Because this movie came out the summer after our freshman year in college. So this is before we were even in our condo that we lived in together. Was it even WGCC radio at the time, or were we still like monthly stuff?
No, it was WGCC radio. Yeah.
Okay.
We launched the Weekly Stuff podcast starts with WGTC radio retroactively, but that launched May 2012, and this was July, so this was right away. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was just us doing a slightly, we were basically just doing the same shit, but like I guess a slightly different context for the podcast. But like super super early in this podcast, and we were very young. And I think my enduring memory of this movie, as I experienced in rewatching it, is a couple of the dumb jokes I made in that podcast about like Bane being high the entire time, because that's the explanation. I remembered like I've got a certain point in the movie of like I remember making that joke, and then like them cheating the editing at the end of the movie with the bomb, and like, oh, I remember that joke too. And that's like legitimately that is like the impact the movie made on me, was some dumb jokes I made on that podcast. All of which are right. I think they're I think, I don't want to say I told you so, but I was definitely the person who didn't like the movie that much on that podcast at the time. And I feel like I definitely did not care about the politics. I didn't think I noticed anything about the politics of this movie. It was very much just like on a story level, the movie is like all over the place, and there's just a bunch of really dumb shit in this movie, like sending all the cops into the fucking sewers, or having the cops march down the street in a single file, or it's like a 3-file line towards a bunch of dudes with AK-47s. Also, we'll talk about it in the podcast, but like there's some really dumb shit in this movie that's fun to make fun of. And I remember doing that. But I think the thing for me watching it this time is that like, oh, now I'm not like a 19-year-old kid who doesn't really know anything about politics or analyzing politics in big blockbuster movies, which is something I like didn't really care about then. And with the context I have now and the proved like, analytical stuff that I've developed after I now have like a degree instead of just being like a freshman in college, it is definitely like, oh boy, like it's I think it is more overt than Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. And The Dark Knight's already pretty fucking overt with its like pro-dictatorship stuff. But this one, with its like taking elements of like the French Revolution, or Occupy Wall Street is around the same time. It couldn't really have been.
No, it was. It was definitely. Chris Nolan talked about it. Like it's.
Oh yeah, because
this was a discussion at the time. This is an anti-Occupy Wall Street movie.
Yes. But like, I mean, yes. So it is very much a movie that is like about this rich person fear about like the dirty masses rising up and taking everybody's money. And instead of that being a like great Robin Hood story, it is a story that is like, oh God, we can't let the dirty poor people take our money. We gotta, because they're fine in their place in the world. They're just being tricked by a bad man. So we have to beat the bad man and then restore the status quo where everybody who is wealthy, and then the other people, who gives a shit? Because this movie does not give a single flying fuck about any normal people in Gotham whatsoever. And all that stuff about this movie I now find deeply noxious.
Normal people in this movie are represented by their version of Selena Kyle, who the whole arc is that she learns the conservative principles of pulling herself up by her bootstraps. Like, it's so not.
I mean, well, no, she learns the conservative principles of hooking up with a rich dude, which is basically what she does at the end of the movie.
Yep. Yeah. This movie is gross and it is bad.
Yep.
But we'll get into all the politics and shit, Sean. I want to start with, I think, the most pressing issue of this movie.
Uh-huh.
This movie is almost all first act. Am I wrong in that?
It's either almost all first act or it has no first act and it's all second act. Like, it's kind of hard to figure out. I think mostly because what they're doing with Batman in this movie is just utterly bizarre and perplexing, and I'm not sure what they're trying to do with the character, really. But yes, it is so much like meandering, vague setup, build-up type stuff. And it is just you're pulling your hair out for like the first 90 minutes of this movie waiting for the plot to start.
So, okay, that's where I want to start, because I know sometimes people maybe get annoyed with my 3-act stuff, but I harp on it not because I think like it's a prescription every movie needs to follow, but that in general, when you are analyzing especially big pop media, you can and you have a reaction to it, like this was really good or this was really bad, and you want to analyze why it was one of those things. A great starting point is almost always looking at it through a 3-act lens. You know? Like Mad Max Fury Road. If you watch Mad Max Fury Road and you come out and you're like, oh my god, that's one of the best movies I've ever seen, it was so well paced, all of that stuff, and you want to understand it and like break it apart, look at a 3-act structure and like map it onto that, and you will see why the movie is so brilliant. You know? I did this with the Demon Slayer, the movie, Kimetsu Mugen Train, a couple weeks ago on Twitter. And it's the same thing. That movie is just on point with that structuring principle. This movie is broken.
Yeah.
So the thing about 3-act structure is you have, let me break down some of the basics here so that you know some of the vocab I'm using here. But you have sort of these 3 acts, which is like, you know, you have sort of your rising, starting. Act 2 is sort of confrontation and things happening, and Act 3 is your climax, right? And each of those is there's a couple of big moments that have to happen or tend to happen in these things. So Act 1, you'll have your point of attack, which is something like early in the story, usually the first thing that sort of gets things moving. So in this movie, there's actually a very clear point of attack. That's Bane on the plane kidnapping Dr. Pavel. That's your kickoff point, right? In Star Wars, it's Darth Vader boarding Leia's ship. All that kind of stuff. Yeah. Your inciting incident is the moment when the plot sort of kicks in, and it's when the plot arrives at the protagonist's door. The point of attack is usually detached from the protagonist. The inciting incident is when it arrives at their door, and the lock-in is when the protagonist is locked in to whatever their path in the movie will be, what their goal is, they know it. It's when Luke Skywalker turns to Obi-Wan and says, I want to be a Jedi like my father before me, right? That's your lock-in.
Yes.
Act 2 is where they will start working towards their goal. There will usually be a major milestone. In Star Wars, that is landing on the Death Star. Well, no, Death Star is the disruption. The milestone is sort of when they get off of Tatooine. The disruption will be something in the middle that changes the course. In Star Wars, it is when they land on the Death Star because they didn't even know about the Death Star.
Yeah, because they're trying to go to Alderaan. That's where you think they're going to head.
Yes.
When they get there, Alderaan is just a bunch of rocks, and then that's no moon. That's a battle station.
Yes. And the main culmination is when the tension up to that point is resolved. And in Star Wars, that is, they've rescued Leia, and they think they've done what they set out to do, but they haven't because now they know about the Death Star and Obi-Wan is dead. So Act 3, then you have a new final tension that is related to the tension so far, but follows from it. So the final tension is in Act 3 of Star Wars is will we destroy the Death Star? In Mad Max Fury Road, the main culmination is arriving at the Green Place, but they realize the Green Place is dead and it was just a myth. So now the final tension is, can we get back and defeat Immortan Joe? Which was not their goal at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. And then the climax is doing the thing, blowing up the Death Star, the big final chase in Mad Max, what have you. The fight with Akaza in Demon Slayer Mugen Train, all of these are final tensions, climaxes, right?
Yeah.
The Dark Knight Rises is a 3-act movie. It is not trying to go for some avant-garde, like, non-narrative thing. But if you try to map these on, it is really hard. And I have, Sean, in my notes here, I have all of this mapped out. I have times, I have everything. And I have it split to charitable reading and uncharitable reading.
Uh-huh.
The charitable reading, and I think this is what Chris Nolan would try to tell you they were going for, is that the first act is everything leading up to Bruce returning as Batman. So the point of attack is Bane on the plane. The inciting incident would then probably be Gordon falling into the sewers and meeting Bane, which is when Bruce then learns about it and decides to come back as Batman, and his lock-in is probably when Alfred leaves, because he is on the path, right?
Yeah.
That is still an incredibly long first act. Alfred leaves at the 1 hour mark. But that is roughly where you would say that. And then I think Act 2 would be all the stuff with Bane, with Batman seeking out Bane. The disruption would be Bane breaking Batman over his leg. The main culmination would be Bane's plan sort of coming to fruition and taking over the city. And then you would have a super long third act with Bruce in the pit and then the climax in Gotham. That is still a fucking horrible structure for a movie. And what you see there is a very weak main tension, where the main tension for Acts 1 and 2 is just, what's Bane up to? And the main culmination is we find out what he's up to. That's a terribly weak main tension, and it's why the movie doesn't work up to that point. Because also there is, in that reading, Bruce's lock-in is completely unmotivated. Because him coming back as Batman is one of the biggest problems in this movie. It is a wholly unmotivated thing. I remember you saying on that podcast, Sean, on podcast number 6 or whatever it was, that it felt like he shouldn't have been in the Batsuit until the end of this movie when he gets out of the pit. And it still feels like that. Because he doesn't have a lock-in until later. So I would argue an actually better way of looking at this movie is that Act 1 is the majority of the movie. Because the plot, the stakes, and Bruce's character, if we view Bruce Wayne as the protagonist, which I think we probably should because it's a Batman movie, there is no lock-in for him until he is in the pit with his back broken, watching Bane on TV take over Gotham. And then that is his lock-in of, okay, I have to fix my legs, I have to get up, I have to get out of this pit and beat Bane. That is the point when he has a motivation. Up until that point, Bruce Wayne has no specific motivation in this movie other than what is Bane up to, and that's not a specific motivation. That's not.
Yeah.
So that lock-in, Sean, in my accounting, happens 101 minutes into the movie. 101 minutes is when we cut back to the pit after Bane's takeover. Bruce's, the moment when Bane breaks Batman's back in this reading, I would honestly call that the inciting incident, and it happens 75 minutes into the movie. Then you would have a second act that is, and I think this makes sense, that the second act is Bruce in the pit, because the second act is him working towards his main goal of becoming Batman again. That second act is 16 minutes long. If you count it from when when you're in the pit to when he leaves, he's in the pit at 101 minutes. He gets out of the pit at 117 minutes. It's 16 minutes. The pit climbs, this is hilarious to me, Sean. There's 3 pit climbs. This is often how second acts work, by the way, is you have a goal that you do kind of a tripartite structure sort of towards. The first pit climb is at 107 minutes. The second is at 113 minutes, and the final one is at 116 minutes. Within 9 minutes, he goes through his now I'm a new man arc, and there's no clear reason why he gets out the third time versus the first 2.
He just doesn't have the rope on, which makes him jump more.
Yeah.
Because clearly the whole movie was about him losing his fear of death. Was Batman's problem?
Yeah.
That's what the old man in the pit says.
So then you have this really short second act, and then you have a pretty long, actually not that long, you have a 39-minute third act in that reading, and that's a pretty normal third act. And that is like the most normally structured part of this movie is the third act, but it's coming so late in the movie. It's 2 hours into the movie is when you finally get a third act. So this movie is just structurally fucking broken. Most of the movie is a first act because I don't think you can argue that Bruce's like lock-in is getting back in the Batsuit because he's not getting in the Batsuit for anything. We don't know what Bane's plan is. We don't know what he's trying to stop. It's not like the Joker comes in and it's like, I have to go stop that guy. It's so different from that. It's so opaque. Most of those first 100 minutes of the movie is just shoe leather to explain why Bane has a nuclear bomb. And I said this on Twitter, and I am fucking right on this. that you could cut half of this movie out of the movie if the first scene was just Bane stole a nuclear bomb, instead of Bane stole a scientist who will help him build a nuclear bomb. You could cut most of this movie out because it's all plot mechanics, it's not thematic, it's not character-driven. Most of those first 80 to 100 minutes is just all of the movements on the chessboard for Bane to get a nuclear bomb that he could have just stolen instead of having the most convoluted plot I think I've ever seen in a superhero movie.
Yeah, it is, and I like your assessment and your breakdown there because I think it's very on point. Because then it's also I think with the more accurate reading, not the one that Nolan is necessarily going for, I also think accounts for what is like another strange section of the movie with the Talia al Ghul twist.
Yes,
which that makes way more sense for that being like a 30-minute third act rather than it being the like hour-long third act or whatever the fuck that Christopher Nolan maybe was like going for.
Yes.
And I think like fundamentally the movie's biggest problems in that regard with its structure all comes down to they just have absolutely no idea what they're trying to do with Batman as their protagonist character.
Yeah.
Like they're just and it's really bizarre because they're pulling on a couple of different like clear inspirations for what they're doing, right? So like what the obvious one is The Dark Knight Returns, like the graphic novel that exists that made this movie's title impossible to remember for years, because they are so similar, and the concept of this is a Batman who hasn't been Batman for years and now he has to learn how to be Batman again, which is not actually what this is. Like he doesn't really ever have to learn how to be Batman again, like because he just sort of starts being Batman again because he has a magic leg brace and fucking all that shit. And then he gets the shit kicked out of him, and then he has to learn how to jump without fear or with fear or dying something, and then he can fight Bane now. But
he punches him harder.
Yes,
I love it. It's the exact
same harder and in the mask.
It's the exact same logic as the end of Game of Thrones, where at first Daenerys didn't fly her dragon good, and so the dragon died. But then she flew her dragon good, and even though there were 20 times more arrows, she flew it gooder, and so she won.
Yes, exactly. It's like the worst possible way to structure your climactic fight scene is, and it would be like if the end of Return of the Jedi was just Luke is a better saber fighter than the Emperor and Darth Vader, rather than it being about, oh, he wins because he learns not to give into his anger and believe in like love and hope and family, and he puts his faith in his father, because that's a satisfying conclusion to a movie. Not, and I'm actually, because I trained this time, I'm a better sword fighter than you are, and that's kind of it. That's like always a terrible way to structure your climactic fight scene. It's just about it being punching harder. So they're pulling on The Dark Knight Returns nominally for the setup. And I think that's one thing that I've always struggled with this movie, is like that there is this concept that he has not been Batman for 8 years, and that becomes rapidly irrelevant within the first 30 minutes of the movie. It's like it starts feeling mildly relevant, and then as soon as Bruce is introduced, you start feeling like, this feels like it doesn't really gel with what you'd expect, how you'd handle a story of like cranky, crotchety old Bruce Wayne who's given up on being Batman. And then he's in the Batman suit and fighting people and flying around and blowing up cars and shit. And it's like, this is just bizarre. They're also pulling on the Nightfall storyline, which is the iconic Bane story where he gets his back broken, which I think that also presents some difficulties with trying to gel that with the old 8 years hasn't been Batman Bruce Wayne, because Nightfall is specifically about, this is a Batman who's on top of his game, and he's maybe like a bit overconfident and arrogant with his control of Gotham, and Bane takes advantage of that and defeats him, which I think does not match at all with like what you try to structure around and he learns how to be Batman again because he hasn't been Batman for 8 years. It would be, he has been Batman for years at this point and hasn't faced an enemy that's been able to outmaneuver him like Bane, and because he's overconfident, he gets defeated. And then the third story they're pulling from, which this is the one of those three I have not actually read myself, but there's a late 90s comic book storyline called No Man's Land that's about Gotham being cut off from the rest of the world and Bat family type characters having to deal with that crisis. Which is pulls nominally from when all of a sudden Gotham turns into Manhattan, one of the most distinctive American landmarks, the most distinctive American city. And it's like, you really just can't pretend that it's like that it's Manhattan all of a sudden. Very weird shit, but the bridge is getting cut off and Gotham having to fend for itself. And it's just sort of like taking a couple of major plot points from those three stories, very haphazardly mashing them together, and not considering in any way how do you make a consistent, compelling version of Batman as a character that can navigate those different three stories and have a motivation and a drive and a change. And they just kind of don't do it, because this is yet another Batman movie where Batman really doesn't go on a character arc over the course of the thing. Like there's a fake version of the character arc where they pretend that he has learned something that lets him get out of the pit. But as you noted, Jonathan, that section of the movie is like hilariously short. It's like 16 minutes. That's not enough time for there to be the character change and like introspection and difficulty in dealing with traumas or whatever it is that he needs to overcome. And you can tell because by the end of the movie, he hasn't changed anything. He doesn't do anything different. He doesn't realize that, like, oh, maybe my wealth and privilege does make me blind to some things. Or maybe I was overconfident in being Batman. Or maybe I should never have given up the mantle. Like, all the things that are different things that they could have done with the plot. And they choose to do none of them because the movie is just a collection of scenes that I think Christopher Nolan thought would look very cool, an expression of his, like, weird sort of anxiety around poor people taking his money. And that's just what the movie is, right? And it's just like, I don't need to watch that for 2 hours and 45 minutes. Please don't make me do it.
Yeah. No, you're so right. It is the problem. It feels like this has been a growing problem because it's an issue in Batman Begins that they don't really know what they're doing with Batman. But that movie has enough fun with all of the, like, Batman Begins elements of him, like, getting all the stuff together that I think it works. You don't really care that much in that movie, right? Then you get to The Dark Knight, and, okay, they really don't know what they're doing with Batman in this one, but you have Heath Ledger as the Joker, and you have all this great cast members, and there's a lot of really great sequences, and the movie moves really well, so fuck it, we don't talk about it that much. And then it just bites them in the ass in this movie, where this is the only one where they honestly try. They gesture towards it. They're like, he's gonna have an arc. But again, that second act is 15 minutes, and most of it is Bane backstory exposition. Mm-hmm. And it's just, he tries once, he doesn't get up out of the pit. He tries a second time, he doesn't get up out of the pit. And then he's like, no rope. What did he do? What did he learn? What did he find out about himself? What makes him go into the final confrontation a different man? I don't know. He jumped better. Like, that's...
Yeah, and how does... Because the movie gives you this piece of exposition or whatever from the wise old man in the fucking pit that's like, oh, the problem is that, like, you don't fear death, and that's why you can't make the jump. And it's like, if you don't use the rope, the fear of death will then make you stronger and you can jump. And it's like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything that happened with him earlier in the movie? Like, is that why he lost against Bane? Like, nothing about that is established or built up or developed in any way that is convincing or felt in any way by the audience. It's just like a random justification thrown out because it's something that they watched some other movie that used that as a plot point. They're like, we'll use that here. It sounds cool to say. It's the classic Christopher Nolan movie dialogue approach of like, it sounds cool, so let's just have him say it.
If you squint, you could see a story about him being humbled because he is arrogant at the beginning. His arrogance leads to him being beaten by Bane, who he doesn't properly prepare for, and then he humbles himself by jumping without the rope, and now he is better. But it doesn't do that well. Let me compare this to a much better movie that does this exact story, and you're not going to expect what I'm about to say. Rocky 3. Rocky 3 is the one where he fights Clubber Lang. And at the beginning, he's on top of the world. He's Rocky. They don't do a weird thing in Rocky 3 where he's been retired for 8 years and then decides to box again for a reason, because that would be a weird way to start Rocky 3. But, yeah, he starts Rocky 3. He's on top of the world. Clubber Lang comes in. Rocky thinks he can beat anyone. Mickey, who's basically Alfred in that movie, is telling him, no, you can't beat Clubber. He's a different kind of boxer. You haven't seen this guy before. Rocky doesn't properly prepare. He gets in the ring. He gets his ass kicked by Clubber Lang. And then the second act of Rocky 3 is an actual story about him kind of learning humility and learning a new way to fight, because you have Apollo Creed come back and he teaches Rocky new things, and Rocky has like a very clear character shift in that second act that when he goes back into the ring with Clubber Lang, he fights differently. What he's trying to do is use Clubber's strength against him. So he's trying to make Clubber like wear himself out. So Rocky is fighting much more evasively. And then he's able to beat Clubber Lang because he opened himself up and he like let Apollo become his friend and he did all these things differently and he learned that he wasn't perfect. The Dark Knight Returns is a stupider movie than Rocky 3. That's what I'm saying. And Rocky 3 isn't a smart movie, but it gets the fucking basics of storytelling and it's a satisfying watch. This movie is so much stupider than Rocky 3.
Yeah, the other movie it made me think of that has a similar plot structure, another movie that is much better than this, is the Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods movie.
Yeah.
Which is a similar... Goku feels like he's the man, he's hotshot, he's beaten everybody, nobody is stronger than Goku, he beat Buu, all that stuff. Then this god of destruction, Beerus, shows up, and Goku's like, oh yeah, sure, I'm sure you're strong. Here, let me turn Super Saiyan 3 and kick your ass and show you that, like, I'm the best there is around. And then Goku is just bodied completely by Beerus in like 2 seconds, and then Goku realizes, oh, I've been arrogant, and I need to find a different approach, and that there are higher highs that I can push myself to, and all that kind of stuff. I think the fundamental issue with this movie is them trying to do both crotchety old retired Bruce Wayne who's given up on being Batman and Batman who's on top. Like they basically try to do, and this is one of the things I think is fundamentally flawed with the movie's like conception of Batman as a character, is they kind of try to do this half-hearted like Batman has one storyline about like there are multiple lines of dialogue at the beginning of the movie about he's like won the war. That him, this will touches on some of the politics stuff, but him through the Harvey Dent stuff and all that at the end of the Dark Knight has had thousands of people arrested and put into prison with this Dent Act. That means this like, and they're all in prison, and because of the Dent Act, they will never get out. And that's presented as a good thing in this movie, is like very directly, and like we have made it so that like there's no way these criminals will ever be back out on the streets, and that Batman through that has won because he's put enough bad people in jail and he's victorious and he's like become soft in peacetime. And that's part of like I think what the movie is trying to do with Batman. I think it's one of the reasons why the movie it's hard for me to understand this movie on a fundamental level, is because that is just like fundamentally an alien story to Batman. It just doesn't make sense because Batman is a character for multiple reasons who can never just win. One reason is because he's a serial character, and so like there's always another villain for him to fight because it's the nature of the stories that Batman is built for. But also because crime is not a thing that just ends. Like you don't reach a point where it's like, and nobody ever murdered somebody ever again for the rest of human history. It's like nobody ever stole something, nobody whatever. Like Batman, there's always going to be shit for Batman to do. That's kind of the point of Batman, is that like if you want to buy into the fantasy, it's like he's this like necessary vigilante who's out there keeping people safe because he's like the good guy saving everybody else. It's like there's no world in which Batman just has won. That makes no fucking sense. And yet it's kind of the vision the movie wants to present for us, is that Batman has won, he defeated crime, and he's gotten lax because he's been on top and he got soft, which is something that, like, I mean, Bane literally tells him in that fight that you have gotten soft in a time of peace. And then Bane shows up and he kicks Batman's ass, and then Batman's like, oh, I should have never stopped cracking down. Really, I should have been out there putting even more people in jail, like Bane. So I'm going to go climb out of this pit and throw more people in jail, except for this time I'm actually just going to shoot them, because he does shoot and kill multiple people in his Batcopter in this movie, despite saying that he doesn't use guns.
I mean, he kills Bane. I guess Catwoman does it, but they do kill Bane.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, he specifically shoots one of the drivers in the truck at the end with his Batcopter gun right after Anne Hathaway has the callback to the line about, I know you don't use guns, but it's not my style. And it's like, and then Batman just goes fucking shoots a dude in his Batcopter. But
again,
yeah.
I know, it annoys me a little bit that Batman kills so many people in Batman v Superman, but at the very least, Ben Affleck doesn't go around in that movie going, I don't kill people, and then pointing a gun at them and killing them. Like,
yeah.
Hypocrisy is bad, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, especially if it's not addressed anyway in the movie, which it's not here. He just says his no gun line because he's Batman, and then he also has an entire arsenal which is then stolen by Bane, and then there is no point in the movie, with the very many things in the movie, where there's any kind of like soul searching or recognition that it's like, Batman, you're the one who made this possible. The fact that you have been stockpiling tanks and bombs and like military helicopters and shit in the basement of your skyscraper super corporation is kind of part of what's caused this to happen. There's no fucking moment where he has to deal with that revelation at all.
This movie is so stupid. Can we talk? So let's talk about the beginning of the movie and like the world it lays out. I want to follow up on what you were saying about Batman defeated the crime. So what they lay out at the beginning, you have Bane on the plane, which is the best scene in the movie. It doesn't get better than that. That's the high point. It's not that good, but like at least Bane.
And
is
then,
funny.
and it's also like, I think if they're trying to do their whole Batman thing, it's like fundamentally the wrong place to actually open the movie.
It's a James Bond opening. It has nothing to like this movie. This is part of this, Sean. Is I just think that like Nolan is checked out on Batman at this point.
Yeah.
Like you can just tell in this movie he wants to make a James Bond movie, so he does a James Bond opening, and there's a lot of James Bondy stuff in the middle. You know, Batman brings Miranda Tate back to his like room, and they have sex, and it's a very James Bond style thing. And even though like it's completely superfluous and has nothing to do with anything, because Chris Nolan doesn't know what human affection is, so he can't write it. But yeah. Anyway. The beginning of this movie, you have the plane sequence, and then you have Commissioner Gordon. It's an 8-year later speech he's giving, and he's planning to tell the public about the Harvey Dent lie because his conscience is eating away at him. Which, like, Gordon actually has a lot of potential in this movie because this movie is like all of his like moral compromises catching up with him, and I really wish this movie actually went to the point of like challenging Gordon, and it doesn't. Like, I guess Joseph Gordon-Levitt gets mad at him in one scene, but he's never like actually has to live up, like wrestle with like all these bad things he did. But it's a possibly interesting thing he could have grappled with.
I mean, specifically, because I will want to talk about that scene when we get to it. But like that scene where Joseph Gordon-Levitt gets mad at him comes back up in his reference at the end of the movie of him realizing, you know what, I was wrong.
Yeah.
That like sometimes you do have to get your hands dirty. You were right. That's why I'm not a cop anymore. So it's like that scene in the middle is not there for you to as a tool for you to be able to like dig into Gordon and like deal with his compromises as a character, that he's been flawed. It's more of like, we're going to set up that actually it was right at the end of The Dark Knight was a good thing.
We'll get into this, but yeah, I mean, Joseph Gordon-Levitt's whole arc in this movie is realizing that he can't be a cop anymore because government systems and public accountability are bad, and so it's better to be a vigilante. It is terrifyingly like bleak and like off the fucking again. Raving lunatic on a street corner watching too much Fox News is the politics of this movie. But the beginning of the movie, Gordon has this speech, and basically what they lay out is that there was this Harvey Dent act that they were able to do at the end of The Dark Knight that gave them the teeth to go after the mob and basically do these big RICO cases where they were able to put away, I think they say, there are 1,000 people in jail. 1,000 criminals in Blackgate because of the Dent Act. That is not a sentence said like, oh my God, there's 1,000 criminals because of this one act. No, they're saying it like they're proud of it. There's 1,000 criminals in Blackgate because of the Dent Act, and because of that, there is no more organized crime in Gotham. The Dent Act gave them the teeth to dismantle organized crime, and therefore the city is now safe. And in that scene, you have the cop played by the guy from Breakfast Club. What's his name? Yeah, who's like, he's a character in this movie. He dies at the end because Blue Lives Matter. That's a huge theme of this movie. But you know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway, you have this line from him where he hears like, he's the commissioner now, but only for a little while longer. He's a wartime leader. The mayor's going to kick him out in the spring. We don't need him anymore. That's the whole, the thing is like, Gordon is a wartime leader, but now we're in a time of peace. So like they very explicitly say like this Dent Act allowed them to like solve things. Batman isn't Batman anymore because the city doesn't need him. They solved crime because of organized crime they got rid of, which, yay. Anyway, that is sort of the setup for this whole movie.
Yes. That's, I mean, do you want to talk about the politics of that?
Yeah, let's go with it.
Yeah, so it is the most brazen version of the thing we've talked about in all of these movies. of its attitude towards crime, which is just this: there are bad people, and the bad people are the criminals, and if you throw them away and lock them in jail, then all the good people will be safe from the bad people. And it's just like, it's taking that to this incredible extreme this is one of those moments where I was talking about at the top of this podcast, that like you kind of have to break your brain to understand what this movie is saying, because in any other movie, that sequence is like a dystopia hellscape, right? That's like, this is 1984 or Brave New World. That's like, and we locked away all the bad people, and we did it based on the fact that we like created this whole elaborate lie about the person the act is named after, and the dude murdered like 5 or 6 people or whatever, and he threatened his children, all the stuff that like Bane brings up, and then is never addressed again after Bane reads that fucking letter. The like hilarious that Gordon literally wrote it down or typed it onto paper and has kept it, and at some point somehow Bane got a hold of that, which is one of the many, many very silly plot concepts in this movie, or like just like sort of conceits of the way that things would work. I find it utterly bizarre that Gordon would ever actually put that on paper rather than just say it if it was something that he wanted to say. It's very conceited. So Gordon has that whole speech, and this is the thing they're doing. And any reasonable worldview would see this as like a horrible thing. And so then, like, even if, you know, you're not as hardcore like anti-prison and stuff like that as we are, like, the American legal system would not stand for this, right? Like, this is specifically this is fucking so wrong on every single level, in a way that, like, you cannot be. I don't know how Gordon could even possibly stand to be a cop if this is his belief on how things should work. Like, why are you not fucking Batman? Because you clearly don't give a shit about the law or justice or rightness or goodness or any of those things, because this is fucking horrifying. And the movie, I think it feels like it's supposed to be a bad thing, but the movie never makes it a bad thing. And it's just this thing where you have to hurt yourself as a human being to try to conform to the movie's worldview, that this isn't about how the end of The Dark Knight is a mistake. Because everything it lays out so starkly shows that everything about that last movie was morally wrong, and it should be fucking, all that shit should be torn down because it's an atrocity. And instead this movie just ends up doubling down on it. It uses that as like a plot lever to sort of give Batman a pseudo downfall, right? And you have a character get mad at Harvey Dent to be morally righteous about it, but the movie's not actually interested in tackling any of those ideas. It's only using those ideas as plot leverage, as a way to sort of get some things like in motion, basically. And it's utterly disgusting.
Utterly disgusting. 2 things I want to add on to that. First, the actor I was talking about was Matthew Modine, who was not in The Breakfast Club. I was thinking of Full Metal Jacket. Those are very easy to get mixed up. The Breakfast Club, Full Metal Jacket, basically the same movie. I don't know how I mixed those 2 up, but yes.
He's also in Stranger Things, which is the last thing I saw him in.
Okay. Matthew Modine, good actor. I hate his character in this. But yes, Sean, I want to agree with everything you just said, and like, how you know the movie doesn't think it's wrong is that later on, when Bane like plays his cards, what he does is he breaks everyone out of Blackgate, and all the criminals come out of Blackgate as an angry mob wielding AK-47s and going like, yeah, 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 and they all get behind Bane and just immediately go to their violent ways, tearing the city apart. And he gives the big speech in front of Blackgate as he's letting the prisoners out. And so the movie plays into this total right-wing Fox News fever dream of, like, if you release a criminal, they will just go on crime sprees, and so you can't let them out. And I am not, like, broadly saying Fox News. This is a specific thing Fox has done. There's a John Oliver piece from several years ago, many years ago now, because Obama was president. It was a piece on prisoner reentry. And in that piece on prisoner reentry, that was why John Oliver did it that week, is it was prompted by a series of pardons and commutations that Obama did fairly standard stuff for a president to do. Trump never did it because he was a racist piece of shit. But and Obama did it more than other presidents, like anyone since Gerald Ford. Ford was actually, we remember Ford for the Nixon pardon, but he also actually was one of the only presidents who had like an actual pipeline of pardons and commutations for people who were in prison too long. But Barack Obama kind of brought a lot of this back and had done all these pardons and commutations, mainly for people who had, like, it was drug sentencing things, and had been in federal prison for, like, crazy amounts of time, or were going to be for crazy amounts of time. And it's honestly a kind of thing that our politics, in general, even right and left, agree that, like, mass incarceration has been a mistake, and that all of the drug sentencing laws of the 90s are bad, right? Like, that is, like, not really a debate anymore. I mean, they don't say it. The right wing still believes in it. They just don't say it anymore. But you know what I mean. And Fox News that week had been going on this tirade about how, like, because Obama let all these people out, we were going to see rising crime numbers that summer. And, like, all of this is, like, so evil. And that, like, all these people are just going to go out and they're going to rape and pillage and sell drugs and all this shit because they're just criminals. And that's all they are forever. And, of course, none of that came to pass because most prisoners who come out and re-enter into society try to be people and, like, not go do crazy crime sprees. And in fact,
because you know, most of them weren't going around and just murdering random people on the street.
Yeah.
Like, that like is a form of crime that effectively doesn't exist. Is the sort of like unmotivated, they're just bad people, and so they just do bad things because they like being evil. Like, that's just not a thing. That's not what humans are. That's not how they work.
There's definitely not 1,000 of them in a single metropolitan prison.
Yes, exactly. Like, it's just such a deeply awful misunderstanding of humanity and, like, society and social structures and systems and why crime exists within those things.
That and that is why I say this movie's politics is a raving lunatic on a street corner who's watched too much Fox News, is because it's a fever dream. It's like, let all the prisoners out and they will immediately all grab an AK and go up with this gang leader and just start tearing the city apart. Like, that's what criminals do. Even though apparently these were all people in organized crime rackets who were, like, doing, like, embezzling and, like, moonshining because it's the 1920s in Gotham. Like, what? I don't know. What do they think gangs are? It's like, okay, The Dark Knight Returns, the actual Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller stuff does some of this with gangs where, like, they're crazy, but they're, like, actual mutants. They're, like, people who have, like, morphed in, like, atomic sludge. Like, I know Frank Miller's politics are fucked, but even he's not as overt as this, right?
Well, because The Dark Knight Returns exists in a crazy comic book reality,
Yes.
and, like, Christopher Nolan is so insistent on these movies being grounded so closely. There's, like, again, at this point, it's like you just have, like, dozens of these big, like, flying location shots of, like, Manhattan and stuff like that, where it basically looks like an episode of fucking a super high budget episode of Law and Order half the time. It's like, this is just, you're just in Wall Street. Like, this is just Wall Street. There's no attempt at feeling like you're in some sort of heightened reality in any way, shape, or form. And so it just has nothing to hide behind. Because a lot of this stuff is, we should say, like, it's not uncommon within the superhero genre. Like, the Arkham games do some of this stuff. The Spider-Man game does this stuff. Like, the Marvel movies do some of this stuff with criminals and crime. Marvel movies avoid it somewhat because most of those heroes aren't even, like, they're fighting random crime. They're, like, that's more of, like, a, like, foreign policy in the way they do that, and that's kind of gross with U.S. militarism. But it's less pointed than what Nolan is doing here. It's more of, like, this galactic background radiation version of, it's just sort of accepting a bad status quo and not thinking about it and not being critical of it, but is telling stories in a heightened comic book world. So it's easier to just kind of turn your brain off a little bit, and you recognize that some of those things are problems, but you can enjoy the things that it does well without that spoiling it too much, because it exists enough in a separate feeling world that you're not confronted with it. In Dark Knight Rises, like, there's no attempt to do that whatsoever, and what it is doing with crime is not just we need some bad guys because we have a superhero, so there just has to be criminals. It's this very specific, and they're bad people, and they're in prison, and they need to stay in prison, and we pass the Dent Act to make sure those fuckers never get out, and then Bane let them all out. It's so aggressive about how it depicts that stuff that it's it feels awful watching it, particularly that middle scene where I'm like watching the movie and being like, yes, Bane, you're right. Like, we should be like, rip that prison down, destroy all this shit. Like, I so desperately wish that Bane could be a Char-esque figure in this movie instead of being like a straw man that Nolan has created. But it's like,
well, he's not even a straw man.
Be...
He's pretending. He's doing an act. Like,
yes.
he is. I actually think so. A lot of people during the Trump presidency would like take like Trump's lines and put them over pictures of Bane, and I actually think that was a funny thing because Trump was doing the Bane shit where Trump would just pretend to be things. Like, Trump never actually cared about the kinds of populism he talked about. He never cared about giving people health care. He never cared about Wall Street. But in the 2016 campaign, particularly, Trump would parrot a lot of that. And that's why, like, a lot of, like, these disaffected voters sort of, like, flocked to him. And it's like what Bane was doing. It was, like, obvious preening bullshit. And part of the way Tom Hardy plays it is as... like, honestly, he sounds like Tucker Carlson on Fox News or something, where just like, it is just like lying through your fucking teeth, smarmy asshole, but you know your audience is too stupid to get it because you have such contempt for them. That's how Bane plays it, is as someone who has contempt for the ideas he's saying, but believes people are so stupid that they will come along with him. Right?
Yeah. Yes. It's like, this movie would be so much better if he was actually the like revolutionary leader that he's pretending to be.
Yeah.
And it would make the movie have to confront any of its ideas that it presents rather than just having this sort of ridiculous over the top villain that doesn't believe any of the things he's saying, and so he doesn't believe in anything because he doesn't have a motivation, really. There's like not much to the villain side of the movie in that regard.
Because he's working for Miranda Tate. He's working for Talia. Yes. She's the one with the ideals. He's just a foot soldier, we find out, which is
her ideals are that, hey, you killed my daddy, and so I'm getting revenge. Like, it's even removed so far from the like ridiculous sort of vague, we have to set society right once it's gone awry League of Shadows thing. That's not even really restated as a primary motivation in this movie. And so all of the crime stuff just is... It has no understanding, it has no care, it has no thought for why crime exists, what's going on there, either in the like normal, these are criminals in jail, or these are supervillains. It just doesn't care about that shit. It just sees them as bad people that need to be locked up. And it's what it says at the fucking first minute of the movie in a way that like a normal movie would say, and this is wrong, and we're going to spin the movie showing you why like this is wrong and bad, and then fix it at the end because we're going to tell a story. And instead, this does what all three of these movies have done, where it just doubles down on the shit that is clearly awful at the beginning, and you realize, oh, it wasn't seen as being awful at the beginning. I just have like a moderate capacity for empathy, and therefore I would see that and understand that it is bad.
I have a line in my notes here, Sean, where it's just a single line I wrote where I said, you can't signal your politics much better than putting all the leftist stuff in the villain's mouth, which is what the movie does. And like the movie in that sequence where Bane is like in front of the prison and is talking about all this stuff, and he talks about like this, bastion of repression, I will free the people. The movie outright mocks through Bane the idea that anyone could see prison as a symbol of repression or those inside as repressed. It is mocking. It is satirizing the idea that like anyone could think of this as bad. It is like, you are stupid and pathetic if you think anything other than the status quo is good.
Yeah, it is like, it is the anti-Black Panther in that regard. Of like, if you want to look at other movies in this genre specifically, is that does some of this stuff but does it well, is the Killmonger dynamic, and like why Black Panther is a really good movie and why that character is so memorable is because it is that element of where the villain is highly motivated and you agree with their motivations. You just wish that they could find a point of like mild compromise to be able to like come together with T'Challa and find like a peaceful solution.
Well, it's the Char's counterattack thing. He has a scorched earth solution that T'Challa is like too humanist to believe in. But the thing that makes Black Panther so special is that Killmonger gets to be right because T'Challa makes a significant change in his life and his nation's outlook because of his encounter with Killmonger.
Yeah. And that's something that, like, in Black Panther does it extremely well, but it's also not something that should have to be particularly praiseworthy of a movie, because that's like a super standard plot structure.
Yes.
Like, that's so normal. You have your main character, your protagonist, who is in one position. They encounter the antagonist, which presents them a confrontational opposite position, or a maybe not directly opposite, but a position where you cannot coexist. You then confront each other, and then you have the synthesis of those two ideas that the protagonist changes to meet some of what the antagonist was presenting them, and then that's the end of the movie. Like, that's just a normal plot. And so it's that thing that it's just baffling that at the end of this movie there is no resolution at all that even approaches something like that, because it's not structured. It can't think of structuring it that way, because it can't see any value in anything that of Bane, or what Bane in Talia and that side of the movie represents or could do, or anything. It doesn't want to give those things any value, because it needs Batman, as he is in all three of these movies, to be 100% right 100% of the time, and he can never be wrong or fallible in any way. And so you just end up in this, like, very static, boring plot mode of where everything just feels like it's happening as some sort of vague plot mechanic, and not motivated by character beliefs or behaviors or themes or ideas, and it's just things that occur.
There's this moment in the second half of the movie, the last third really, where Selena Kyle is like walking through the ruined city, and she's seeing like the rich people being ripped out of their towers, and like everything's on fire and shitty, and she's like, oh, this seems bad. And then the character played by Juno Temple, who Juno Temple is awesome, and I don't know why she's in this movie for like 3 minutes total as Selena Kyle's friend, who I think they're like vaguely gay lovers, but the movie is too sexless to like actually do that. But like,
yeah, and then she hooks up with Bruce at the end in a way that feels like we must return to there must be some kind of weird heteronormativity or something. Yeah, like I got weird vibes around how I was handling that stuff.
Yeah, also. If you want to queer this movie, there's like 60 seconds of stuff you can do with it. But yeah, Juno Temple comes in and like puts her arms around Selena Kyle and says, "There's a storm coming. Remember, this is what you wanted," and that is exactly the logic of the, like, Alex Jones, America will become a lawless hellhole Venezuela if Bernie Sanders is elected. Do you remember all of that? When Bernie Sanders would run, and people would go out in the streets and be like, but in Venezuela, they're eating rats, so why do you want a socialist in charge? And people would, have to be like, well, Venezuela has fairly specific problems. That's racist. And also Bernie Sanders is just, frankly, a fairly normal politician just saying, like, European center-left stuff, right?
Yeah.
But you would exaggerate it to be like, but Bernie Sanders wants Stalinism like Venezuela, because those are the same things. And it's like that is the like dark, like, again, the like right-wing fever dream fantasy of like, this is what will happen if the leftists get what they want. It'll be a terrifying, lawless Venezuelan hellscape. No. And of course you have to put a fucking cherry on it by having Juno Temple come up to Anne Hathaway and be like, there's a storm coming, remember? This is what you wanted. Fuck you, movie. Fuck you. Do you want to get into the French Revolution of it all, Sean? Because that also connects to that whole idea.
Yeah, and this is something that Christopher Nolan has specifically stated, so it's not just like reading into it, but the movie is like specifically playing off of elements from the French Revolution, which, like, the French Revolution is a very complicated historical event, and there are like lots of ways to read it and have feelings about it and its influence on things. I mean, long story short, what the French Revolution was the common people of France overthrowing the monarchy and the sort of elites at the time, killing the monarchs, and like experimenting with democracy. Like, the form of government was very chaotic in France because it kept on switching around this time, and then eventually get Napoleon, all that kind of stuff. But it's ideals around liberty, equality, and fraternity, which were sort of like the three like words that backed up the revolution, and it was a lot of common people and then a lot of sort of Enlightenist era thinkers motivating this push to throw off the shackles of the monarchy, which it should be stated, just to be very clear and definitive, monarchy is a bad system of governance. In case anybody has any impressions that it's not, it is. The idea of running your government through a hereditary system of almost always men passing it on to their sons, and that they have supreme control over the law and governance of the land is a phenomenally stupid idea that is then also made extra stupid when your weird beliefs about like class and stuff at the time also then means that the royal people can only ever have children with other royal people in Europe, which at a certain point ends up with maybe some issues with incest and things like that, where you maybe end up with a lot of people in charge that really should not have been in charge. So monarchy is bad. Getting rid of monarchy is a good thing. And every country in Europe did it in one form or the other. Either you just like, let's fucking cut their heads off and move on, like France, or you do, I mean, England did cut their heads off and try to move on, and then it didn't quite work. And then you get what a lot of European countries have, which are like constitutional monarchies, where the monarchy is a symbol of the government, but doesn't really have much in the way of any actual power authority, like in England.
Yeah, I mean...
so France... Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, and the French Revolution, you can talk about the Reign of Terror, but the long-standing impacts are actually quite positive in that those revolutionary ideas, the liberty, fraternity, egalitarianism, all of that is, especially once Napoleon... Now, Napoleon is an emperor, but the Napoleonic Code and a lot of the like laws and systems he puts into place are incredibly important to like all of human history ever since, and like democratic societies and democratic republics in terms of how they govern, like they in terms of the ideas of self-governance and those Enlightenment ideals is like codified there and is important to all sorts of societies all over the world. So, and of course the French Revolution does inspire a bunch of societies to do this kind of stuff too. The Reign of Terror is bad, but the Reign of Terror is also, like, explicable in ways that you can trace to, like, people like Robespierre and, like, the different government systems that came up and the problems they had and how power was put into the hands of too few people in different places and, like, media and propaganda that gets out of hand. And it is not, like it's a terrible thing that happened in French history, but it is also not like this thing where you go, they cut off the monarch's heads and then inevitably there was a reign of terror. Like, no, there was not. Like other society, like, you know, America, we fought a war, but we didn't then like have a reign of terror when we got rid of our king, right? Like, the reign of terror is an explicable thing that comes out of this, not like an inevitable lawless fucking Democrats. Damn it, you can't get rid of your monarchy.
Yeah, because, I mean, one of the things that happens with the Reign of Terror is that you end up in the situation where part of what replaced the monarchy temporarily was a sort of cult of personality around Robespierre specifically, and some of the other revolutionaries who then, you know, for a lot of different reasons you can read into, like, end up really abandoning the ideals of what they were representing in the revolution and becoming demagogues, and you know, that's where you get the... you know, you're executing hundreds of people every single day at the guillotine, all that kind of stuff. You have the, like, and now we're going to change the calendar and blah, blah, and like all this stuff where he really sort of was overwhelmed and became seemingly extremely corrupt with the power that he had acquired. And then he himself became a victim of the violent cycle that he had started with the Reign of Terror and was killed. And so... yes, so that's like the thing with the Reign of Terror is like it is bad, and it is a thing that it's not the only time that you have had a big idealistic revolution that then has been co-opted by someone who does not actually embody those ideals and ends up doing bad things with it. So it's
There's
like
a man named Joseph Stalin you should all read about.
Yes. So it's fair enough to like make stories about that. It's like I never want to like present an idea that like that is off limits or something to have the like revolution that is co-opted by a villain or whatever. But it is something that becomes so obsessed within our culture about this that it is a lock and step thing. That every time you have a violent evolution around ideals, that then it's always going to be taken over by some sort of violent bad guy, and then it's going to be turned against itself. When the reality is, as you say, Jonathan, that the Reign of Terror was awful, but the long-standing impacts of the French Revolution, I think, are like unobjectionably positive for the path of human history. And that the benefits of removing the shackles of oppression of the monarchy was 100% worth the cost of what the French Revolution had. Not just for France, but for other European nations.
Well, because like they had a much higher hill to climb than the American Revolution, for instance, because we were a series of colonies on the other side of the world where we just had to sever ourselves from the king. We didn't have to cut off his head. It was a very different situation. Yes. And I think a lot of Americans think like, oh, why couldn't they just do it like we did it? It's like, well, it was a little fucking different, right?
Yes. Yes, 100%. So that's sort of like the big picture perspective of like French Revolution stuff. What this movie is doing with it is, one, it's doing the sort of like classic, like here's like the kangaroo courts thing, which I do like. That's like one of the few sequences of the movie that's like, well, at least this is like going for like a style of having like the ridiculous court with fucking Scarecrow on top. That's like, I could see this in a Batman comic. That's the first time I've said this about any of these movies since Batman Begins, so that's great. And so it does some of that stuff. But really, its sort of take on the French Revolution is so weird when you break it down, because Batman, within the metaphor of if this is like the French Revolution, Batman is, if he's not the king himself, he is one of the nobles, right? He's one of the privileged, rich elite who grow fat on the oppression of all the people below him. And it is very, like, critical for this movie that they never actually show what that oppression looks like, other than through, like, vaguely Selena Kyle says that happens, but you don't see it through her character. You don't experience it in any way. She doesn't live in squalor or whatever. She's like, if she was living in a life of like extreme poverty, that's something that is well behind that character. It's like, you don't get that. You don't get the like perspective of a normal person, or ever see the consequences of the extreme wealth being accumulated at the very top of society, that 1% type concept. Because if the movie ever showed that, it would then have to deal with a perspective that is not just, and Batman is always good. But the movie has to show the Batman is framed as a king. I'm just going to say he's like King Louis, because I think that is what the movie wants him to be. And so in the French Revolution metaphor, then it is basically this fantasy of, what if the French Revolution, instead of King Louis getting his head cut off, he was exiled from France, and he had to then build himself back up from zero. He's humbled, but then he comes back and leads an army of other elites, right? And here it is Batman literally leading a fucking army of cops, which is a crazy sequence to like even just conceptualize that is the thing that happens in a Batman movie. But leading an army to beat down the common poor, which here are the criminals, and then to reinstate the previous status quo, with Batman then passing on his mantle to his like adoptive son, basically, in their weird Robin thing shit they do at the end of this movie, where now Joseph Gordon-Levitt is the new Batman, right? And so it's like, it has now been passed on, like the fucking cowl is basically a crown, and that is what the movie sees as like a good thing, is for like the privileged and elite to, they maybe they took things a little bit too far, I don't know, but definitely the way that things were is good. And it must be restored, and there should not be any meaningful compromises made, or even a recognition that compromises can be made to then make things more equitable or anything like that. And it is about how like the status quo is disrupted by this revolution, and then how Batman, instead of tragically King Louis getting killed, he comes back and he sets things back to right and puts the people on top back on top.
Well, okay, I am not an expert in French history, but if I remember correctly, after Napoleon, they restore the monarchy briefly, right?
Yes.
It's basically like saying like that was the good part of the French Revolution, is when and that's like one of the worst periods in that French history. Is like Napoleon did some bad shit. We can talk about that. It's a complicated legacy, but like emphatically the people who came right after Napoleon were worse. That is a like well-known part of French history, because then they have a second revolution and all this stuff to like overthrow the monarchy again. And this movie is basically saying like, yeah, that's the good part. Like, what if Louis came back and then he abdicated, and then his son, instead of being like, because I think Louis' son is like technically king for like 2 weeks after his dad gets decapitated. Like, what if he was king for life? It's incredibly gross.
Because also, this is something we talked about a lot with The Dark Knight, is that their vision of Batman is so centered on this. He has like ultimate authority in everything he does, and therefore must be seen as right. It is like very much, if you track it onto that stuff, it feels like it is just like the divine right of Batman.
Yes.
Right? That he gets to decide what is good and what is wrong, and that anything that defies Batman in these movies is always positioned as being like an extreme and absolute evil, and everything that Batman advocates for, whether it is the like violation of the privacy of independent citizens, whether it is the violent extraction of a foreign citizen from their like home country, whether it is him brutalizing a person like the Joker, who is coded heavily as being mentally ill in an interrogation room and just kicking the ever-living shit out of them, or they're just dropping Eric Roberts off a roof and breaking his fucking legs. All those things are necessary and right and good because Batman does it, because Batman is the king. And that's this movie's, like, vision of how this stuff works. And that's bad. Like, that's really bad. And it feels awful. Like, it's that thing where, again, like, you have to so remove yourself from what to me feels like a reasonable perspective on politics in the world to even entertain the idea of the notion that, like, that sort of monarchy dictators type system of Batman being always right and always good, and therefore he's effectively the king and must then come back as the king, that being a good idea. Like, how do you even think that? Like, who thinks that monarchies are good? It's not fucking the 1800s, which is the last time anyone even had that fucking thought.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, pop movies and fiction and culture play with, like, stories of noble monarchs all the time. They have since the dawn of human history to now. You know, Black Panther, we just mentioned, is a noble monarch story. The Lion King is a noble monarch story that's, like, actually fairly similar in structure to something like The Dark Knight Rises. I mean, it's much better movie, in part because it's 90 minutes. But, like, you know, in those, though, you're dealing in, like, such a mythic space. Like, Wakanda is already coded as a utopia. It is fantasy. Yeah. It is, like, it's a world where, like, someone like T'Challa can exist and be a good king because his interest is not his own. His interest is his country. Like, there is a nobility about that. You know, and people do criticize these movies sometimes for this stuff, and that's a legitimate criticism. But it's in a very different space than what they're trying to do here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I think it is fair to criticize those things. I think because generally it's more a criticism of, I think we do have a fixation on, like, monarchy and the idea of, like, nobility and that kind of stuff because it's so ingrained in so much, like, cultural heritage and stuff like that it's very hard to move away from. But those stories are also always either a fantasy setting like Black Panther or The Lion King, because, you know, I don't know if you realize this, but lions aren't actually literally kings. There isn't a form of governance on the savannah. I don't want to, you know,
the food chain. The food chain is the form of governance, and it works just fine.
Yeah. So, or it's something where it's a piece of historical fiction,
right?
Like Hamlet, upon which Lion King is, like, nominally sort of vaguely based, right? In which case, like, well, yeah, that's fine, like, because if you're doing fucking some story set in the 1400s in England, or Game of Thrones, which is fantasy and is pulling from European history, like, well, then monarchies are things. Like, you then have to deal with the idea. You can have some, like, here's a noble duke who learns, you know, a Robin Hood type thing where because Robin Hood is one of those stories, he is a member of the nobility, he falls from his position, he learns the struggles of the common man, and then uses the skills he has learned to fight for them. And it's like, you know, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to, like, get upset about the fact that people have those fantasies about the idea of people from privilege being noble and stuff like that. But it should be in a setting where that's appropriate. Here, it's like co-opting all that symbolism, but using it in a movie that is just set in the modern day in what is trying to be a very, like, harsh, grounded, real setting.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about this movie's view of rich people, because it is, like, the first two movies hint at this in all sorts of ways. We talked about it specifically with Batman Begins, of how it sort of views the Waynes, and, like, the vision of Gotham is not a, like, good government or government by the people or anything like that. It's this single rich family with their tower in the exact middle of the city, and if they just have enough power and there's few enough criminals, they can do absolute good, right? Is that a good way to summarize Batman Begins?
Yes.
Of course, then Bruce blows up the fucking train and never rebuilds it, so he's a shitty son. But, like, so you have in this movie, you have Wayne as our rich white conservative who argues for the status quo, even though he's also Batman. Selena Kyle is, like, coded as arguing for the oppressed lower class, but she's ultimately wrong in the movie's worldview, and learns, like critically learns that she is wrong. She has to admit that she is wrong to Batman. There's this line in the Wall Street scene where Bane comes in, and Bane says something about thieves, and someone says, like, there's no thieves here, and then he says, oh yeah, what are you people doing then? And it's like a funny...
So that is... the guy says, like, why are you guys even here? There's no money to steal because it's like stocks and stuff. And then Bane says, Well, then why are you here?
Yes. And it's like this fun, like, if Bane were a better character, like, who was more pointedly, like, believed that stuff, that would be a good little line. But the movie then bends over backwards through that whole set piece to make sure we realize that Bane was wrong and Wall Street is good. So you have the guy outside having to explain to Matthew Modine cop that even if they don't like it, they need Wall Street. There's this line where he says, that money in your mattress will be worth a hell of a lot less if Bane gets his way. And, like...
And that's something that, like, any movie made by a rational human being, that dude would then be the, like, smarmy guy, like, at the end of Ghostbusters. It's like, that's that character that then they make fun of and say, it's like, he's a fucking asshole, right? Like, that's... You know, yes, sir, this man's head is a dick, right? That's what should happen to that dude, or he should get his ass kicked. Like, it shouldn't be presented as like, well, I don't like it, but this guy's got a good point. I guess we do have to get his money back.
And that's exactly what happens. Matthew Modine, like, goes like, well, no, he's right. We may not like Wall Street, but we need them. They are our daddies. Yeah. That's, like, the movie's whole vision of that. And yeah, and then the whole ending is about, you know, how the Wayne is ultimately all good and you have to give the rich people their stuff back. And oh my God, it is so fucking gross. It is so gross all the way through. And it is, again, it is that like Fox News fever dream of all the like shit that you hear out of the mouths of those rich people on TV telling you why you deserve to be poor.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so frustrating about it is because early on, it feels like the movie is vaguely trying to position things like, well, Batman, you know, like a very charitable reading of like the first 30 minutes of this movie would be that Batman is the arrogant, victorious Batman thing, which is a weird concept that Batman has won, but like accept that premise. But that like the problem is that all he did was throw away the common criminals, but really like he's then just allowed like true corruption to fester at the top, which feels like an idea the movie like vaguely is offering you. And then Bane makes any criticism or any dealing with that concept then impossible for the rest of the movie. The movie bends itself over backwards to make sure that you don't actually have to confront that idea. That's like, it's all contained in, there are one or two rich people who are the bad rich people, and they're either killed by Bane or the guy's like thrown into the ice or whatever at the end, right? Like those two characters are the two bad rich people. And you never see the plight of people who don't have wealth and privilege. You don't see those people actually use their wealth or privilege for anything evil. They're just all manipulated by Bane. And so while there's some vague dialogue to that effect, either provided by Catwoman or Bane, that like the city has been able to rot in decadence and corruption, the movie never shows you that or deals with it or cares about it, is yet another thing that the movie needs Batman to be kind of nominally wrong about something for a plot mechanic to function. So it uses it as a plot lever, but the movie doesn't believe in it. So as soon as that plot lever is pulled, it abandons that idea and allows Batman to be right again and shows that he was really always right. And it's that thing that makes the movie so frustrating to watch, is because it offers an idea that could be the plot of the movie, but then it doesn't actually care about that idea. It just wants to do it, and Bane is evil, and he does evil things.
I mean, again, the view of the movie and its whole vision of criminality is that Gotham would have been fine if Bane didn't show up, right? Like, the status quo at the start of the movie is fine, and because Bane, a bad actor, showed up and was able to pull on all these levers, that was bad. But Batman gets rid of Bane, and then Batman gives a successor, so if any more bad people show up, the successor can beat up the bad people again, and then we will keep the status quo. It's frankly the same idea, I think, as like people on the like left or the center now who are like, well, if we just get, not like now, I feel like people have admitted they were wrong about this, but like a year ago, of like, if we can just get Trump out of office, everything will be fine. Because Trump was just a single lone bad actor who came into a system that was working great for everyone, and he did some bad things, and not recognizing that, like, what's very clear to, I think, everyone now, that Trump is out of office and fucking irrelevant, and yet things are getting even worse for democracy and civil rights and all these things. Yeah. That, like, Trump was someone who was uniquely bad in terms of manipulating broken systems, but the systems were broken, and these points of reckoning would have come no matter what. Trump accelerated that, I think. That's fair to say. But, like, he was not, but, like, Object 1 was get rid of Trump, but then there have to be, like, Objects 2 through 10 that, Joe Manchin really doesn't want to talk about. Yeah. So like it's totally that view of criminality and like social problems, is that society is fundamentally fine in the hands of the people it's in. You just can't let it get into certain hands.
Yeah, it's really it is a frustrating movie to watch, to say the least.
There's also, I want to talk about Bruce Wayne for a little bit, and like this is some stuff that I talk about in Batman Begins, but like the abject amorality of this version of Bruce Wayne is breathtaking to me. And like Alfred too. I want to talk about Alfred because boy, Alfred is fucked in this movie, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first off, this is a little thing. This is a small detail in the movie, but I feel like it is part of a pattern that we have to talk about. Why is it a plot point that the Wayne Foundation runs out of money because they stop having profits? What we learn, why the orphanage closes, is because Bruce Wayne does not give any of his personal wealth to the Wayne Foundation. The Wayne Foundation is entirely funded on Wayne Enterprise profits. This is something we learn, that the Wayne Foundation is funded exclusively from profits from the business, and Bruce Wayne does not actually put any personal wealth into the organization. And so the orphanage that like Joseph Gordon-Levitt grew up in has been closed for a number of years, and Batman didn't know because he doesn't pay attention to the business. What that means is that, Sean, the Wayne Foundation in this universe is a tax shelter. It's a charitable arm of the company so that they don't get taxed on their profits. What is Bruce Wayne doing with all of his personal wealth? I am very confused, and I think he might be a bad person.
Yeah, no, I mean, he doesn't do anything or believe in anything as a character, right? And like, it's specifically in this movie, it does feel like, because they don't bother to sort of like double down on the motivations he did have in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, as like, you know, gross as some of like the criminality stuff is, at the very least there it's like, well, this is a clearly motivated character who's trying specifically to like accomplish things with a specific goal and vision of what he wants to do. And for so much of the movie, Batman lacks that completely. He's just kind of fucking around with Catwoman and investigating Bane and doing that stuff, doesn't really care that much. And then when Bane beats him up, it's so much more about trying to get back and fight Bane, and it doesn't feel actually motivated by like a love of Gotham or anything like that. Like, that element of the character feels like it's been completely sanded off by the time you get to this story. And so yes, you then have the scene where he's just sitting there in his mansion doing nothing, accumulating wealth. And I think one thing that's frustrating is that it then doesn't even, again, because Batman has to be right in all things, it doesn't do a story where like he's jaded and lost belief in that stuff or something, and then has to see that all that has value, that there are ways he can use his money for good or whatever it is. It's just that like, oh, nobody ever told him that the orphans aren't getting money, so he's like, oh, well, then I guess I gotta go make sure the Wayne Foundation gets profits. And there's no actual criticism of the character there. Right? And it's something that then never comes back up again. It's not reinforced by other character details or plot elements anywhere else in the movie. So it can't be read as a thing that is like a character trait, that he has stopped caring about the charity stuff that his company is doing.
It's not charity. He's not doing charity. Like, can you imagine if... Like, look, there's plenty to criticize, like, Bill Gates about and stuff, but can you imagine if the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was funded exclusively from Microsoft profits? I do not think Bill and Melinda Gates would get nearly as much credit as they do for, like, all the stuff that foundation has done if we learned that they didn't actually give it any money. They just took profits off of the top instead of paying taxes. What the fuck? That is such an insane thing to write in your movie. All basically so you remove, like, the sane version of this story would be that Joseph Gordon-Levitt comes by and is like, why did you stop funding the orphanage? And Batman's all, like, brooding and is like, I did charity for years, kid, and none of it amounted to anything. And then Joseph Gordon-Levitt looks him in the eye and says, it amounted to me. And then, like, Batman is like, okay, I'll write you the check. But they don't do that because Batman would have to admit he was wrong.
Yes.
Fuck this movie.
And it's just, he's just not like a character. Like, it's just like what it ends up feeling like. Like, they just don't bother to really give him a character in any meaningful way. And then the only place where he has that motivation is like, it's within the pit. it's all just so abstract and feeling irrelevant to anything else in the rest of the movie that you're just... It is that thing of where the chickens have come home to roost with how they've handled this character, where it's like they haven't had a good vision or good idea for it for 2 movies, but they had enough of a spine from the source material that they kind of were able to limp by. And then now that they don't really have that because they've mixed 3 different pieces of source material that don't mix together well, you need to have your own idea of what Batman is at that point, and they don't, other than that he's always right.
Let's talk about Alfred. Alfred is so inconsistent across these 3 movies. But what we land out here is an Alfred who is begging Bruce Wayne to be selfish. Like, he says, Alfred has this line where he says, "There was nothing for you here but pain and tragedy." Apart from all the good he could have done with his money, I guess. Like, Alfred directly encourages Bruce to be selfish, to live purely for himself, to abandon Gotham, to just go live. Like, his whole dream is that Bruce would have fucked off from Gotham and gone and done nothing with his life. And what's funny is that this is, again, with, like, the Snyder comparison, this is a critique that I have definitely levied, and you have, and, like, is a fair critique that, like, why is there such a focus in Man of Steel and Batman v Superman on the Kevin Costner father who wants Superman to not do anything with his powers, right? There is the... Like, and again, what I think, to be fair about those movies, is that it's never the only voice. You have those movies are set up as, like, a dialectic between, like, the godly father in Jor-El who wants Superman to live for humanity, and the human father in Kevin Costner who wants him to live for himself. And so you have that, and then you have the terrible line in Batman v Superman where the mother, Martha Kent, says to him, like, "You don't owe these people a goddamn thing," which, like, is a great thing to have in a Superman story. Very stupid.
Yeah, thanks, Ma Kent.
Yeah, very stupid. But you know what?
Those good old Kansas family values, you know?
Yeah. And I think all that stuff is stupid and I don't like it, but you know what I will give those movies is Superman at least then goes and is Superman. Like, he doesn't do that. He doesn't, like, do the selfish thing and just take off the cape and go, like, fly to Mars and be captain, like, be like Dr. Manhattan, right? And actually, if you watch through to, like, Justice League, the Snyder cut of Justice League, like, specifically repudiates all that. Like, his arc is, like, he chooses to be Superman. But anyway... But in these movies, Alfred is saying, substantively, the exact same thing that, like, Ma Kent and Pa Kent are saying in those Superman movies. And I feel like it's just as toxic here. Like, yes, like, being Batman is bad in all these ways, but, like, he's not telling Bruce to, like, he's, like, not telling Bruce to, like, go another way to help the city. He's telling him, abandon the city. Don't be part of this. Don't do anything for anyone, Master Wayne. It's all stupid. You're rich. Live in your tower. I just, like, why would Alfred, if nothing else, I think something that connects all the versions of Alfred is that he also believes in the mission of helping Gotham. It is a common theme that Alfred doesn't agree with Bruce's methods, right? But they are...
I think it makes sense that he doesn't really ever want Bruce to be Batman truly. Like, he wants Bruce to find a way to be happy and still do good.
But he wants him to do good. Like, that's key.
Yes.
Alfred is there. Like, Alfred doesn't always agree with the politics of it, or the, not the politics, but, like, the methods of it. But Alfred is simpatico on the idea of, this is a city worth saving, and it's worth doing good, and I will help you do that good in whatever way I can. And that's just gone here. It's just gone. And then Alfred leaves an hour into the movie, and we never see him again. And it's just utter nonsense.
And it's so frustrating because every scene he has is basically just there to be a, like, wet towel to give, like, this, like, speech against Bruce Wayne. That, again, in a better movie would then be a thing where the movie would come around and say, and Alfred was really right? So, like, there's a part where after Batman, the whole stock exchange thing happens, and then Batman goes on his crazy wild chase, and Alfred, I think very rightfully, gets mad at him. It's like, what the fuck are you even doing? Like, why is this your solution to these problems? There's so many things you could do. And he goes off about, like, and you could fund the police more. It's like, maybe those are bad ideas, Alfred. But you're right that it's like, you have all these resources that you could use to help the city. Why do you have to be Batman to do any of that stuff? And that is something where, again, in a sane, normal movie's plot structure, that would be something that would come back around at the end where Batman learns and understands this, like, you know what, maybe he's right. Like, maybe Batman is a mistake. Maybe this isn't how I beat Bane. Maybe the way I beat Bane isn't by being Batman. It is by being Bruce Wayne and using my knowledge of the city and the connections I've made and the wealth and all of this to fund a revolution or whatever it is, and displace Bane or whatever a different end of the movie would be. But instead, like, Batman's right because he's always right. And so he does his whole Batman thing and he's Batman, and his solution to Bane is like, well, I just have to be better at being Batman and then I can beat him. And then he beats him and then he gets his sort of fake, messianic death. But then he actually lives, and you get to come around to that scene that feels like it is like the payoff they set up of the Alfred having his idea about the vacation. He looks up and Bruce is there and he's happy. But it's such a tainted vision of that kind of payoff of there. It's like, well, all he's done is he was Batman really good, and then now he faked his death and he's abandoned all of those responsibilities. He never used his wealth or privilege to help people. That never ended up happening. He never saw any kind of way to change. He just did this one last mission of his Batman, faked his death, and now he's going to go sleep with Anne Hathaway in like France or whatever. And that's it. And that's the end of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, he does, like, Alfred does get, like, what he keeps pushing for, which is Bruce being a selfish bastard at the end.
Yeah.
But, like, yeah, that scene, so I fucking hate the scene when he comes back as Batman after the stock exchange thing, because it's this big, flashy action sequence where all Batman does is run interference for Bane. Like, Bane would have been caught if it weren't for Batman there. Like, Batman totally enables Bane. Him being Batman is emphatically and clearly and unambiguously bad in that scene, because all he does is attract the cops, lead them on a chase, get a bunch of cops killed, clearly, because there's all these cops flipping, or cars flipping and stuff. And then Bane gets away scot-free, and Batman achieves nothing. He comes back. Alfred rightly calls him on this, and then Alfred leaves because he's like, I can't do anything else, sir. And I kind of side with Alfred there. I think he's probably right. This guy's pretty far gone. But then, because Bane has a nuke and he takes over the city, Bruce has to be right now, because the only one who can get rid of the fucking nuke is Batman. And his fucking Batcopter and all his expensive toys. And so he is ultimately vindicated from so he starts out from a bad place, but then, you know what? Ultimately, he was right, and it is that divine right of king bullshit, where it's like, yeah, they're going to do bad shit once in a while, but because they are divine, it's all ultimately good in the end.
Yeah, and it just feels like the world of the movie contorts itself in order to fit Batman, instead of Batman changing as a character to fit the world that they've built, which is
a great way to put it.
A backwards-ass way to make a fucking story.
Yes. Very, very backwards. And, boy, what drugs do you have to be on to think that the right way to make your Batman sequel is to take Michael Caine out of it for most of the movie? Because I will say, one way this movie really suffers is that after that first hour, Michael Caine, as frustrating as I find the writing for Alfred here, he is, in all three of these movies, your greatest bastion of humanity and humor. And because of that, this movie is so cold, and it is so humorless, because he is gone until the very last scene when he comes back crying over Bruce Wayne's grave.
Yeah.
What a terrible choice.
Yes. You lose out on, like, those brief glimmers of warmth that were, like, left over from the embers of the second act of Batman Begins in The Dark Knight, where you have this one or two scenes where it's like, yes, Christian Bale and Michael Caine have really great chemistry. They are very funny together. Like, it's one of the only places where the writing in The Dark Knight had any life or verve to it at all. And everything else is just these big, nonsense, stoic speeches that sound vaguely cool but mean nothing. And here, they give Alfred some of those, like, speeches that sound good and mean nothing. And he says a couple of them, and then he leaves. And then you're just left with nothing. And you're just like, well, there's no heart left to the movie. There's nobody to stand in for, like, normal people. There's nobody for Bruce to bounce off of as a character. The closest thing he has is then Catwoman. He's not much of a character in this movie either. And so it's just, like you can feel the hole left by Alfred very starkly for like 2/3 of this film.
You have Catwoman and then the weird guy in the prison. Like, a better version of this is going to sound silly, but I actually mean it, is like if Batman woke up and Alfred was there in the prison with him. Like, that, like, they had chained Alfred up there too, and like he has and that's someone he has to talk to. Like, that would be a better version of that second act, and then at the end of it he throws down a rope and brings Alfred up or something, right? Like, Why kick Michael Caine out of the movie? That is so confusing to me.
I mean, it honestly just feels like, based on the way they used him at the beginning of the film, they just didn't know what to do with Alfred as a character.
Yeah.
So they just wrote him out of it.
Yeah.
They just didn't know how to fit him into the plot they were writing. Where it's like, maybe if they did try, maybe they would have seen a little bit about how batshit fucking crazy their movie was.
Yeah, oh my god, it's so bad. So bad. All right, what else to talk about here? I mean, here's the thing. Maybe some of what we're talking about sounds like petty and nitpicky, but you know why part of that is? It's because this movie is long and it is fucking boring. Like, again, those first 100 minutes, especially those first 80, everything up to when Bane fights Batman and, like, breaks his back, is just exposition and just endless plot movement. And it is a feature-length film's worth of just, like, throat clearing getting up to the plot, which is Bane has a bomb. Which, by the way, based on the politics, I do just want to point out that this movie's view is that you should never do renewable energy because someone could make a nuclear bomb with it, so renewable energy is bad. Just check off all of the Fox News, like, talking points.
It's so bad. It's so bad because you have that scene, and it's something that's like, this is my second time watching the movie. So it's like, the first time I watched the movie, I didn't realize that in the scene where they show off the nuclear reactor to Miranda Tate, the Talia al Ghul character, that she's actually Talia al Ghul, right? So the one person who's actually interested in the nuclear reactor and believes in it, and the person that Bruce is like, I'm going to put my trust in you that you're not going to use this thing that could save humanity, because it's like we have this incredible source of renewable energy. It's like that character is actually a villain the whole time, and her whole plot is to get that thing and turn it into the bomb. And so there's no vision, there's no part of the movie at all that actually has any belief in this fucking nuclear reactor as a thing that could do good. And it's just so frustrating because you see this like, that's another thing of where, Batman has to always be right. Batman's smart enough to create and fund this source of renewable energy that could, like, solve all these problems, and it would help people so much. But because Batman says it's dangerous, well, we sure can't use it. He's just got to keep it locked up in his basement. Nobody else sees it. Nobody else really knows that it exists and that it's perfect and that it works and it's fine. He's just going to keep it there because he's the one that gets to decide whether or not it's a thing that can be used for the benefit of other people. And he's just decided, we're not ready yet. He's not the king. He's God. He's God sitting in the fucking clouds saying mankind's not ready for fire because they'll fucking get some burns. So I'm just going to keep this here until people have proven that they're good enough. And then I will bestow the power of fire unto them so that they can be warm at night. Like, that's basically how he's positioned. And then fucking, like, the seductress, because that's the other thing of, like, the only time there's any form of, like, sex or sexuality in any of the three movies is by someone who's seducing him. So great depiction of women. Like, the seductress is there to sort of seduce him and deceive him and take fire from God, and then use it to kill people.
And then the end is God
awful.
taking fire back.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And going and ascending back up to heaven.
Basically.
Yep.
Oh my god. All right. Let's try to walk through the plot points that get us to Bane has a nuke. Because it's most of the first 90 minutes is trying to set this up. So Bane on the plane kidnaps Dr. Pavlov because Dr. Pavlov... Is that his actually... No, Pavel. No, Pavlov is the dog guy. Dr. Pavel... Yes. Because Dr. Pavel is apparently the only guy in the world who knows how to change a fission reactor into a nuke. I feel like other people could figure that out, but whatever. So
he's the only one.
So in the plane, he kidnaps Dr. Pavel, but he puts some of Dr. Pavel's blood in a corpse so that people will think Pavel is dead.
That's what that was. I was like, are they giving that man a medical treatment as they're stealing him in the plane? Like, what the fuck are they doing? That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it doesn't. It doesn't. I'm sorry. It doesn't make sense. It's like, that's where, like, if this was a James Bond movie and that sequence at the beginning was followed up on in any way, it would have made sense. But that sequence at the beginning of the movie, it's just entirely because Christopher Nolan had an IMAX camera and he wanted to get a plane and do a cool James Bond thing. And that's the only reason why it happens at all.
Yes. So, okay. Then you have Bane is working with the guy played by Ben Mendelsohn, who is like he is on the board of directors of Wayne Enterprises, but he is a rival business owner, and Bane is helping the guy's name is John Daggett, and Bane is trying to help John Daggett get power over Wayne, including Bane hires Selena Kyle to obtain Wayne's fingerprints from the safe in Wayne Manor. That's what Catwoman is doing at the beginning of the movie.
Yep.
When she is taking the pearls, she is actually getting Bruce's fingerprints. And so then Daggett has the fingerprints for that. And then Bane attacks the Gotham Stock Exchange, and he uses the fingerprints to do transactions to bankrupt Bruce Wayne. And that's the plan there. And then because Bruce Wayne gets bankrupt, he loses power within Wayne Enterprises, and Daggett is able to do a hostile takeover, which gets them access to Wayne's stuff, so Bane can get all of the shit from under Wayne Enterprises, and then he's able to get to the nuclear bomb because of what Talia's been up to, and they're able to change that into a nuclear bomb. Like, I guess they did plan it all out. It makes sense nominally. But again, why would you write all of that when you could just have an opening where Bane steals a nuke? You could still have your plane. You could have your IMAX cameras. Oh god, they were transporting a suitcase nuke. Bane got the suitcase nuke. This is bad. And then you could cut roughly half the cast and half the running time, because that's all, like, so many characters, so many scenes, so much bullshit is around the corporate espionage that Bane is engaged in so he can get his shit, none of which has any relevance to the ultimate plot of the movie, because all it matters, all the stuff with Daggett and the stock exchange and the fingerprints and all of that stuff, the only thing it is leading up to is Bane gets a nuke. And then everything else is it's just preamble to that. It's throat clearing. It's meaningless. It's plot for the sake of plot.
Yeah, no, and it's part of the thing where, like, because ultimately I think the implication is that Talia had a lot more of a direct role in all that, because John Daggett, like, that dude's role is actually, like, a lot smaller, because part of his thing also is that his company is the construction company that then is the thing with, like, trapping all the cops in the tunnels. That's part of what. So I think that was always part of the plan, was to trap all the cops in the tunnels, which is a hilarious amount of foresight. But, like, so much of it is really about Talia getting the control of the company because she seduces Bruce, and so Bruce leaves her as the main one, right? And so Daggett's frustrated because he thought he was going to get control of Wayne Enterprises, but he doesn't, and that's when Bane has his "Do you feel like you're in control?" scene, and that all happens because that dude's just like he's just not important at all. Like, they're just using him entirely, and it's really just about Talia. At a certain point, it does kind of feel like, man, Bane didn't kind of have to do much of that shit at all. Like, really, Talia could have just slept with Bruce and then found a way to get where the fucking nuclear reactor thing was, and then you could just steal it. Like, I don't know why you needed to do any of that stuff.
Yeah, Bane's side of things is more to set up all the bombs in the construction so he can blow up all the bridges and trap all the cops in the tunnels and take over. I mean, it is so convoluted. Oh my god.
Yeah, and as you say, it's utterly unneeded. Like, it's just there to have some cool chases in action scenes, and it's that thing where you can feel like they had an idea for a couple of scenes, like the airplane thing. They wanted the stock exchange case. Basically, anytime a scene is shot with IMAX, you're like, this was a scene that Christopher Nolan wanted to do, and then they figured out how to do some connection to material to bridge the scenes that they shot in the IMAX camera, which at this point, like, the proportion of, like, how much IMAX there is to regular stuff in this movie, I find so deeply distracting that it's just like, it's just like every other cut, all of a sudden it's IMAX, every other cut now all of a sudden it's the more normal movie camera.
Yeah, it's really annoying, because
like,
in The Dark Knight, they mostly do it on a sequence basis. In this movie, they almost do it shot for shot. So, like, there are some sequences where it's just switching shot after shot after shot all the way through. And yeah, no, I find it, and I like this kind of stuff, and I find it bad and distracting, and like, I wish there was an option on the Blu-ray for just a widescreen version, because I've seen the movie that way, and it's more enjoyable because there is not the, like, constant shifting. This is the movie definitely where I think Nolan did it the worst, where it's just, there are some sequences where it's just switching back and forth at utter seeming random, and, like, for production reasons, but, like, I don't care about that as a viewer, you know?
Yeah, and it's a thing where it's like, you know, watch it on the 4K Blu-ray, the IMAX footage looks fucking gorgeous. It's like, I get why you wanted to use the camera, but it's just, yes, it is so haphazard, and I just felt like constantly getting whiplash
Yeah.
because the so much about the way the image looks changes so rapidly from shot to shot in a way that feels like it like deeply affects your ability to kind of like process what's even happening in the movie, because it's just incredibly distracting.
To Nolan's credit, he does do this better later. With Dunkirk, he finally starts doing what he should have been doing all along, which, well, I mean, it is expensive, but he shoots Dunkirk on IMAX 70 and then normal 70, so the stuff that would be 35 is normal 70, so the two images look a lot more like each other, and there is an aspect ratio shift, but it is less obvious, and it just they flow together better. Tenet does the same thing. So those two movies, the blend is much better because of that.
That's good. Yeah, because this movie, that doesn't work super well. But you can very, I think, tell that like where the bulk of the IMAX stuff is in a couple of these big scenes, and that's the stuff that he wanted to do. He wanted to do the stock exchange stuff. He needed to do the Bane fight. So that's where you get the highest proportion of the IMAX stuff. And then everything is like, well, how do we connect these plot details together? Oh, well, Bruce Wayne needs to lose all of his money, and they have the nuclear reactor thing, but, well, why would Bruce Wayne build a bomb? Like, that doesn't make sense. Oh, it's a reactor. Well, then how does it turn? Well, we'll have a guy who can make it into a bomb, and that will be the airplane thing at the beginning. Like, it just feels like it was sort of constructed backwards in that way.
Yeah, totally. It is. I mean, it is a mess of a script. Like, it is really one of the worst scripts I've ever seen for something like this. Like, and I think part of it is it has ambition. Like, that's part of what makes it so bad. Is like there are plenty of bad scripts. For I mentioned earlier, like the 2005 Fantastic Four. That's a very inept script. But I find it much less offensive than this because, I don't know, what is it ultimately trying to do? It's like a superhero sitcom. Who gives a shit? This movie is actually purporting to have ideas, and it is so bad at that. And it's 3 hours long. That too.
Yeah. It
That
is an exhausting movie to watch.
Yeah, I mean, this is so clearly a movie where nobody was able to tell Chris Nolan no. And, like, unfettered directorial power is not always a good thing. It just isn't. I don't love every Marvel movie. I do like that Kevin Feige has generally kept his directors from going fucking insane. That's a nice thing to see.
Yeah.
So,
but there's a certain level of quality you can expect to like the basic construction of the plots.
Yes, exactly. They're not going to shoot. I think they did in the early days once in a while, like Iron Man 2, but generally they're not going to shoot a half-written script, right? Yeah. Oh my god. All right. What else is there to talk about? Okay. Let's talk about the Blue Lives Matter stuff. I know that wasn't like a huge slogan yet, but it is impossible not to view it like that. The cop-aganda of this movie is in such full force, it's almost like a parody of itself. Like, you have the stuff where, like, at the end where Joseph Gordon-Levitt is going door to door checking on people, and he's like, you be careful out there. They're hunting down cops like dogs. And you have all the cops in the sewers who are, like, suffering and, like, getting food from the people. And there's this, oh my god, here's my favorite line, Sean, is I think it's Gordon or Joseph Gordon-Levitt or one of these characters. Someone says, there are men down there who have been underground for 3 months. And they rejoinder, they say, police officers who've been underground for 3 months. Yeah. They're not men, they're police officers. And then, of course, you have your big Blue Lives Matter moment, which is all the cops being led by Batman running headlong into massive gunfire because why not? It's so simpering and pandering and stupid. And then Matthew Modine's character is there purely to die. He is there to, like, show the nobility of police officers because he's the guy with a family who goes and fights for a higher cause, and then he winds up dead in the fight. It is gross. And also, I will argue, there is no stupider idea in any Batman movie, and I am very much including Joel Schumacher's movies here, than Gordon sending all 3,000 Gotham PD officers into the sewers at once. That is one of the stupidest plot points in the history of movies, especially because the movie is, like, so pro-cop, and that's, like, something you would do in a fucking, like, parody movie about how cops are stupid. Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, no, it's the thing that's weird about that side of the movie, where, yes, the movie is hardcore cop-aganda. Like, there's just no other way to look at it. It's so, the sequence of the cops marching down the street, which is particularly in a modern context. I mean, at any point in time, but like, ever since Ferguson and where we are with police right now in America, like the image of the army of police marching down the street, it's like, this does not bring any degree of like comfort or assurance or whatever to me. This is like fucking stressing me the fuck out looking at these images. But the other side of the movie is that like the cops are so hilariously bad and they're so hilariously incompetent. And yes, it is the sending every single police officer into the tunnels, which, to be fair, to Gordon's credit, he was probably on painkillers when he said that. He was in the fucking hospital. He probably, I don't know how all that shit, chain of command and all that works with police officers and everything, but I have to imagine if your commissioner is in the hospital and he like nearly died and he's being medicated and shit, he probably doesn't actually have the authority to make any kind of call. I would like to think that a person in that position who would recognize as compromised enough, that's like, well, probably whoever's the second, like the vice president of cops or whatever in Gotham, that's the person who takes over for a little bit, right? Who's second in command? Because you don't want to get the dude in the hospital bed who's making the call about, let's send every single one of our army of cops into the tunnels at the same time. Anyways, here, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, investigate this suspicious map that marks these spots in like a circle around Gotham over major streets that cover sewers. It's like, oh, what could this possibly be about? Very weird. I guess I'll follow up on this. Dramatically too late to actually change the outcome. So that's hilarious. I think even funnier to me is the cops marching down the street. And so they're marching towards the group of Bane's thugs, which, Batman comes in and disables the turrets or whatever, but they're with like these armed turrets that are Batman's fucking Batmobiles. Again, they never really addressed Batman's complicity in the militarization of all that stuff. But they're marching towards all of Bane's thugs, and all of Bane's guys have fucking assault rifles. They got AK-47s and shit. And then Batman comes in and he shoots the turrets and then he flies away and all the cops go, yeah! And then the cops just bum rush this line of dudes with fucking assault rifles, and the cops are like kind of shooting off their pistols every once in a while, and they're just running into this like armed position with machine guns. And then they just, somehow they make it without getting basically entirely gunned down. And then the whole thing just devolves into a big fucking fist fight. And it's the most absurd thing. It's like, why are any of the cops even alive? Like, also, why you have guns too? Why are you just running at them in the middle of the street to go punch them? Like, it's just utter fucking madness. It's like, why is this ending in some big fucking brawl in front of, like, the Capitol building of Gotham or wherever they are at the end of that movie? Like, it makes no sense. It's like we didn't, if you see images of like conflict in Vietnam and the Iraq War and stuff, it's not a bunch of people fucking beating each other up in the streets. It's fucking, you're having guns, you have military tactics. It's not like there's a reason why people stopped doing that shit in World War I, because you got fucking thousands of people killed by running at fucking armed positions with machine guns. It's so fucking dumb.
Well, and it's part of, this movie has this really weird conflation where it doesn't really see the cops as cops, it sees them as soldiers. And,
yes,
like, that is a problem in America in general, that we conflate those two things, because obviously they should ideally be distinct. Soldiers who, like, train to fight behind enemy lines in other countries for our national defense are one distinct thing, because they're fighting foreign enemies. Cops should be, they work for us. Cops are like social elements who are supposed to like enforce laws and help people. Now, we don't really live up to that idea with cops in America, in part because we make this conflation, and we have cops view their citizens who they serve as combatants and not their constituents, right?
Yeah.
So, like, that is a major problem in America that this movie plays into. But it also just the imagery is just all fucked up, where it just treats the cops as soldiers and, like, plays into all of those images and, like, does the, like, we're gonna do a pitch battle for some reason when we all have guns. It is utterly bizarre. It's like Nolan wanted to make a Lord of the Rings fight, but he had cops and criminals, so he just, fuck it, I guess. They'll punch each other and no one will get shot? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
it's very dumb.
It's like, and it's hard to shoot a modern kind of battle scene like that using like modern military tactics and make it cinematic, because people are going to do things like hide behind cover. That makes it hard to get your big sweeping helicopter shots in like Manhattan or whatever with people marching down the streets, because they're going to be hiding behind cover because they don't want to get fucking shot. They're not just going to sprint down the street and start punching people. It's so fucking silly. It's not the right of the fucking Rohirrim. Like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Other stupid idea.
Very ridiculous.
Okay, so we're arguing about what's the stupidest idea in this movie. I said, send all 3,000 police into the sewers at once. You said, have them bum rush people with AK-47s. Here's another one for you, Sean. What about the U.S. military letting a major American city be occupied just completely without action?
Uh-huh.
I got into this on Twitter with someone where I said that was stupid, and they're like, well, what were they supposed to do? But Bane had a nuke, and I didn't write this, but what I would have said is, I 100% believe America would fucking nuke New York before they would let terrorists take New York. Right?
Yes.
Like, we would, if this was an actual situation where you had a guy in a fucking mask go take over New York, we would sooner nuke the fucking city ourselves than we would let him just have it. Like, I'm sorry, have you never been to America? Have you never watched our fucking speeches? Like, there's this line where they have the President of the United States, who's played by the guy from 24, who played the Secretary of Defense on 24, and he says, we do not negotiate with terrorists, but we do recognize reality. And I'm like, that is... No president would ever say that. There would never be the situation where you would have the president go out and be like, okay, Bane, you have the city, it's fine. We would send in the National Guard. We would send in the army. We would, even if it would risk blowing up the city, like, obviously, how do you know nothing about the United States? It is the most, like, biggest fucking leap of faith if you have lived one day in this goddamn country.
Yeah, I 100% agree that I think, yes, that the American military would rather destroy their own city than, like, to lose in that way,
yes.
To, like, lose face and all that. But also, like, because it's not that they don't do anything, Jonathan. They send in 3 guys. They send in 3 covert agents, and then they get discovered and shot and killed by Bane's guys in, like, 2 minutes. And that's one of the funniest parts, where it's, like, this whole clandestine meeting with Gordon's guys and the like 6 cops who didn't go down to the fucking sewers, including Gordon and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, not including Matthew Modine, because he was a coward until he learned it's like he really should be laying down his life and all this shit because the badge and blah 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 blah. But they have that clandestine meeting, and you have the 3 special agents, and it just amounts to nothing. It feels like something where somebody looked at the script and said, I mean, you can't have the American government do literally nothing. Like, whatever you have them do, there's going to be a response that is not just, and then we just, like, made sure we do, and not only just, like, do they not do nothing, they, like, help Bane's purpose in trying to forcibly prevent people from leaving the city. And someone's like, it's just, there has to be an attempt made of something on some way. So they had 3 dudes go in. It's like, at the very least, they would send multiple fucking, like, elite SEAL teams or whatever, right? You'd have at least, bare minimum, the same number of people they used to kill Osama bin Laden. Yes. They'd at least send that to go try to kill Bane, you know? They're not going to send 3 dudes.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm, like, I don't want to be, like, super pro-military or anything. I'm pretty fucking sure SEAL Team 6 could go take out Bane in this scenario. Like, it's a water-based city. You go in through the ocean. If you had a team of, like, highly trained SEALs, yes, I believe they could probably beat the ragtag bunch of criminals with AKs. I want to believe that. We have spent a lot of money on our military. I think they could pull that off.
Yeah, that part of the movie is just it's incredibly contrived.
I mean, but the whole thing,
just,
like, we take it for granted because, like, oh, Chris Nolan's movies are so realistic. This is the stupidest thing in any Batman movie.
Yeah.
Like, it is so dumb. It is dumber than anything in the Schumacher movies. It is dumber than anything in Batman v Superman. The whole idea of Bane taking over Gotham. I know there's a fucking comic version of it, but it is made even stupider because it is attached to Nolan's, his whole thing about realism. So, like, he tries to make it feel like there's verisimilitude to it, and that just makes it feel dumber. Like, if you did this in an actual, like, comic booky kind of way, maybe it would work. But because it's in this context, it feels like the stupidest fucking thing.
Well, yeah, because I mean, also it should be noted that like in the comic book version, that's a version of the world where fucking like superpowers exist, right? So it's like the notion of people being able to do stuff like lock down an entire American city when you can have people that fucking time travel and they can move faster than the speed of light and they're fucking Martians. You know, like that. Okay, yeah, like you could create scenarios where that makes sense in a comic book world, but no, this is like. You know, this is he wrote this on a napkin when he was brainstorming James Bond movie ideas and never realized that even in that context it would still be fucking absurd. It was just like, it's very serious. It's like, no, a nuclear armed terrorist locks down a city and then James Bond is there or whatever. It's like, oh well, let's cross out the OND and put ATMA in there. It's not James Bond, it's James Batman. I mean Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, but like it is also that conservative fever dream thing of like, what if the terrorists, what if they instituted Sharia law in Michigan? You know, what if they were able to, this is what they want to do, this is why we have to spend $1 trillion a year on the military, and this is why we have to ban the Muslims from the country because they would take over Gotham with their nukes. Like, it is so much on that, like, be afraid, people, be very afraid edge of, like, the Fox News-averse. I fucking hate it.
Yep, it's really frustrating. I feel like because we've been talking a lot about this movie, and we've talked a lot about like the stuff that Bane does. I do feel like we need to talk about Bane himself.
Yeah, there's a couple characters I want to talk about. Okay, with Bane himself, I will say the one thing I do enjoy in this movie is Tom Hardy as Bane. I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. I do enjoy it. It has given us years of memes and jokes and laughs. It is a wonderful thing. The sound design on it is terrible because he sounds like he is coming in from a different movie theater. The dubbing is like so heavy-handed, but it is a memorable villain performance. I like it very much. I love that he is just high and having a ball. I think it's kind of like with the Joker in the last movie where I have a lot of problems with some of the writing around it, but I think the performance is quite fun.
Yeah, I 100% agree that I think like Tom Hardy is like just going for it with this weird version of the character. Like I have some issues around like I do think it is frustrating that Bane is so often whitewashed when the character is supposed to be Mexican.
Yes.
And it's like he's always whitewashed in other media and stuff like that. And it's weird here where it's also like I mean, I don't. It wouldn't be better if they had the character be Middle Eastern, but it feels like the character is supposed to be Middle Eastern based on like his background and stuff and Talia and all that. But whatever. But they have Tom Hardy here. I don't know what where he comes from, the voice, all of that. We talked about on the Dark Knight at the end of the Dark Knight episode that he just sounds like Deckard Cain, like talking through a fucking mask. But I think he just has so much charisma and he's having so much fun playing the character that this the only time the movie has any verve in it is when he's on screen and you get the big drum theme that sounds cool, and he's just got that physicality, and then he gave us the memes, right? Is that in 2012
it was the Bane voice. It was the height of humor. If you were younger than we are, you probably didn't live through this period of time where everybody just did the Bane voice, and it was the funniest thing in the world. Truly, we have never, ever, ever found a meme or joke better than the Bane voice.
Yes. He's a James Bond villain. I mean, he is... If you put him in a James Bond movie, he would be right at home, and he would be one of the best. Like, he is totally in that lineage, down to, like, having the scars and, like, the physical deformations that, like, James Bond villains usually have, but he's also, like, over-the-top and charismatic and handsome in his own way, even though he's got this giant mask on, like... And honestly, he would be better than that. This would be so much more fun if it was him versus Daniel Craig. Like,
oh my god, yes.
Because like Daniel Craig at his best has that like nice like kind of lightness in his step and humor as Bond, and like if you had this Bane going against someone with like a mild sense of humor like Daniel Craig's Bond, man, it would be fucking perfect. But you have him against humorless, I'm Batman. It's just terrible.
Yeah, because also it should be noted that Christian Bale's Batman voice, you can feel that he's dying in this movie. Like, it's so bad, because he's trying to do it like Dark Knight, and he can't even do that.
No.
And yeah, but yes, it is, Bane is a very fun villain, even if, like, I do think there's, like, I mean, it's a part of the problem of, like, the entire plotting and scripting of the movie, that he just really has no motivation unto himself. He's just kind of... you feel like there's supposed to be something more to the character, and you keep on kind of waiting for that to be there, and then there's just not. And I think that that's very frustrating because it just is a thing, kind of like in some ways with the Joker from The Dark Knight, where a lot of the plot and the writing of the rest of the movie doesn't actually live up to what Tom Hardy, the performer here, is giving this. But
I do want to give Tom Hardy credit because, like, I remember at the time there was some criticism from some people saying, like, why did they get an actor that good? Like, it doesn't matter. He's in a mask. You don't care. And I think that's totally wrong. Like, I know you don't see his mouth, but, like, he does a lot with his eyes. The way his, like, eyes bulge when he says stuff like, you know, crashing this plane. Like, all of that stuff. Like, he has his, like, just bugging out, wigging out eyes. The way he, like, it's a very expressive performance, even with the limitations of the mask and everything. And I think it's very impressive. I do think, like, every time I watch it, it just becomes more obvious that, like, I'm not sure what they're going for in the dubbing, like, sound. Like, does the mask amplify him? If it does, why does it sound like it's coming from, like, loudspeakers outside, like, away from him? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just coming on like a dub in like an old Hong Kong movie, you know?
Yeah, there's no effort whatsoever to make the voice feel like it is situated physically in the scene. And I think that there are some moments that can work okay. I think some of, like, the fight between him and Batman, I think it's when he's, like, the only character on screen, it's kind of fine. Yeah. But whenever he's having a conversation with another character, it's just incredibly distracting that his voice is not being in the sound mix. It's not locational to where the character is on screen. It's just always, like, dialed up to 11. It's hitting on, like, every fucking speaker. You're feeling it. Your fucking subwoofer is coming in. It's this weird thing where it feels, like a Hong Kong dub, or it feels a lot like watching some of, like, the spaghetti westerns, where all the voices are dubbed in, and you're like, well, there's just no real attempt to sort of fit the voice in the scene, and it's very distracting.
But in a spaghetti western, it's everyone, so you don't care. Like, it's just the way it sounds. And then, But what's weird about it is we do know that this was a fix in post-production, because the Dark Knight did this too. The Dark Knight, half a year before it came out, with the movie I Am Legend by Will Smith. Remember that one? IMAX screenings of I Am Legend had the opening bank heist scene as, like, promotion, and that's part of why The Dark Knight became so popular, is that bank heist scene was out in the world and people had seen it, and they'd seen, like, the first glimpses of Heath Ledger, and it made the movie very hyped, because honestly that bank heist is maybe the best scene in The Dark Knight.
It's 100% the best scene in that movie.
So people had seen it. Now, they did the same thing for this movie. They did the opening plane heist scene. They had that in theaters before Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, but only on film IMAX theaters, which there weren't many of at that point. So I did not see this version. But people did see it, and people really complained at that prologue about not being able to understand Bane. Now, some people had this complaint when the actual movie came out, and I think it was overblown. I think it really depended on your sound system. If you have a good sound system, he's entirely legible, like probably too legible for the sound design, right? That's part of what we're talking about with the dubbing. But you can, now while that original version of the scene does not exist in official form, people did obviously record it on their phones in theaters, and you can find on YouTube a comparison of the lines from, they did record his sound on set, and there was, like, Nolan had finished and mixed the movie with a certain version of Bane's voice that was primarily based on set sound recording through the mask. And you can hear that in that version of the scene. And again, you can go look on YouTube, and people have done comparisons, like A-B comparisons, between the finished film version of that scene and what was in the IMAX preview. And it's entirely different line readings. Every single line. There's no line readings that are the same. It's all redubbed. He is very difficult to understand, but he also does sound more situated in the space. And I think Nolan, there was enough of an outcry that he redid it for the final cut. And so you get, clearly what they decided to go for was clarity over, like, mixing in the space. And I don't know what the right choice was, because I haven't seen both versions. And certainly if you were going to have him be completely illegible for the whole movie, that would have been a problem. A bigger problem than what we have now. But, like, it was clearly just, like, a weird, impossible situation. And they wound up going for clarity, and it makes it very distracting in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this is not the first time you have ever had a character that is masked for most of, if not the whole movie, and is either had to be redubbed or, like, audio is not super clear, like, easy to hear on set. It just feels like it is a thing that should have been resolved in like a pre-production phase of them figuring out how they wanted to deal with that audio.
Spider-Man talks through a mask, and I don't think there's a single Spider-Man movie where Spider-Man, like, it probably is dubbed for most of that, but it doesn't sound like it's coming from a different room.
No, I mean, you have huge amounts of dialogue is redubbed in modern movies, and you never have that problem because we're good at sound mixing. It just feels like, because I feel like Christopher Nolan maybe took the opportunity to try to like just add like, he wants like to give it like a lot of impact and weight and oomph to it, which it does have in a lot of ways, but it is at the cost of any sense of like it existing within the space of the actual film.
I will say the one scene where it totally works for me, and I do think this is the other best scene in the movie, is the Bane Batman fight underground where he breaks Batman's back. That's a really good scene, and the way Bane's voice actually does sound situated in the space more in that scene if you listen to it, and he has some really good deliveries, like his whole speech about like, you merely adopted the darkness, by the time I was a man it was blinding, and like when he says blinding he reaches out and grabs Bruce Wayne, and the way it's like playing off and like echoing off the walls of that space, it's really well done there, and I think he's very intimidating. And I do think the shot of Bane lifting up Bruce Wayne and breaking him over his leg is one of the best uses of the IMAX camera, because they actually use the whole vertical space. That I've seen that scene in 35 millimeter where it's all cropped to 235, and it's actually kind of illegible because you don't have that height. It's an interesting scene.
Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely, it is, I think, probably the highlight scene of the movie. Like, unto itself, it works quite well. And it's the kind of thing where I don't think it's ever that Christopher Nolan actually figured out how to do good, like, fight choreography.
God, no.
It's more that, like, that is the one scene where he was, like, where he figured out, well, what I have to do, even if he doesn't know how to, like, trust stunt coordinators or whatever it is, his fucking problem with that shit in his movies, that, like, that scene has such a clear, motivated story function, and he's good at telling that story through the action, even if, like, the actual choreography is very kind of plain. Although it is very fun to see the big, like, stompy Batman with his dumb bullshit just get his ass kicked, and you're like, yeah, this Batman sucks.
Well, that's why it works, is because he's being his big, stompy, normal Batman self, which is dumb, and Bane just uses it against him, and Tom Hardy's physicality in that performance is so good that, like, there's a lot of striking moments of Bane just making a meal out of this guy. Like, there's that shot where he's got Bruce on the ground and is just punching the cowl over and over again until it snaps. That's a great moment. It's not like the best action choreography ever, but it's definitely the best in this trilogy. And, like, just compare that to the fight at the end they have is terrible. It is so bad.
It's awful.
Bane just is a different person. Like, Tom Hardy has to just play the character differently, and Batman, he is not fighting any differently. He's still these big, giant, heavy blows with no real sense of, like, he doesn't do like Rocky versus Clubber Lang where he changes up his stance and like tries to be more evasive. He just punches harder, and because he punches at the mask, Bane gets mad and he wins. It's awful. It's awful.
Yeah, yes, it is a very disappointing conclusion to the movie, because it's like one of the only things the movie has set up well is you want to see the rematch because the first fight was so compelling, and then they fuck it up really dramatically. And then Bane is just taken out as like an afterthought by Catwoman, which is also very like disappointing conclusion to that character.
Yep, it is bad.
Yep.
Speaking of which, Catwoman, I like Anne Hathaway. For whatever reason, it has become popular to dunk on Anne Hathaway. I like Anne Hathaway. I will say that. I think she's fine in this movie. I don't like this version of Selena Kyle that much. And I also don't like that she's a straw man to make you think poor people are dumb. I don't like it.
Yeah, no, it's like, I think she's fine. Like, it's a thing where I really just don't think the movie needed to have Catwoman in it at all. Like, I would have much rather this movie desperately needs a common man character that is also not a cop, because Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character doesn't get to be that because he's a fucking cop. You need like a normal person that can react to what's happening in the story. Catwoman is not a normal person. She's Catwoman, you know? And I don't know if that needs to be stated specifically, but to say it specifically, she's Catwoman.
Well, the movie doesn't state it specifically because this movie is too good to use the word Catwoman. That would be for the rabble like Tim Burton who have penguins and Catwomen. We cannot do that. She is Selena Kyle.
Yes, exactly. So I think she's fine in the role. I just think the role just doesn't have... It feels like someone told Christopher Nolan he needed to have Catwoman in it or something. Like, it just doesn't feel like he cares about the character. She's so superfluous to most of what the movie is. She could very easily be, like, edited out in a script rewrite, and you wouldn't lose much of anything at all.
But Sean, she's Batman's one true love. He abandons being Batman for her because they... Do they ever kiss on screen?
They kiss at the end of the movie, yes.
Yeah. Okay. It was clearly I remembered it because it was so passionate. You know, it's like when Peter kisses MJ upside down in Spider-Man. Just an iconic movie moment of sensuality on screen.
Yes, no, it is a perfunctory, hey, it's the end of the movie. Even though there has been no romantic chemistry at all between them, all of a sudden they have to kiss. It's the Christopher Nolan experience.
Yes. Oh my god. Okay, Catwoman. Okay, I think we've talked about most of the other characters, but we have actually not talked much about Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Officer John Robin Blake. Do you remember when this was a trend in movies where this did it, and Star Trek Into Darkness did it with Khan, and then Skyfall did it with Moneypenny, and then Spectre did it with Blofeld, where it's people who, they have a name that you would recognize, but it's a twist, so we have to keep their name something else that's just kind of boring, and then we'll have a big dumb moment that in all four of those movies I just mentioned is the worst thing in any of those movies, is the revelation of the person's real name. My name is Khan. Oh, I didn't catch your name. Oh, my name's Moneypenny. Like, you know, like fucking just terrible shit. Oh, you should use your real name. It's so nice. Oh, yeah. John Robin Blake. Fucking terrible.
It's awful. Yeah, I mean, that is one of the few things I remembered about this movie is this just terrible, awful, just thudding fucking line of dialogue. And it's just fucking some motherfucker at Warner Brothers dragged Christopher Nolan kicking and screaming across the Robin line. It's like, it's our fucking focus testing said that 8-year-olds like Robin. You have to put him in the movie. It's like, no, I don't want it. It's dumb. I want cool, dark, gritty Batman. No, you have to put Robin. I don't wanna. It's like, you have to. Well, what if I make him a cop? What if I make him a cop that turns into a vigilante? It's like, that feels like you're really kind of crossing a weird line that's more like some sort of 70s fucking thriller movie. It's like, and I'm going to name him John Blake. That's not even Robin. Fine, he's Robin John Blake. It's like, okay, whatever, Chris. It's so frustrating.
Here's the full exchange, Sean. He says, he goes up to the woman, he says, Blake, John. She checks a list and she goes, nothing here. He says, try my legal name, and hands her a card. And she gives him the suitcase and says, you should use your full name. I like that name. Robin. Thanks. What the fuck? It's so stupid. It is like...
It's so stupid. It doesn't even, like, then culminate in him... Like, there's no world where there was, like, and then after The Dark Knight Rises, this character goes on to become Robin. Like, he's going to become the next Batman or whatever is the implication of the ending of the movie. It's like, why even bother? Like, why even bother name-dropping Robin? Which also, you know, if people don't know a lot about Robin, there have been a lot of characters who have taken on the role of Robin in the Batman mythos, and a whopping 0 of them have ever actually been named Robin.
Yes.
Because that's the name. It's you know, Bruce's name isn't fucking Bruce Batman Wayne. It's a fucking superhero name, you know? So it's just... You just don't understand who that line of dialogue was written for. Because anyone like us who gives a shit about Robin as a character and likes Robin in other Batman media is just going to be angry and upset. Yeah, and insulted. It's like, well, here's this character I really like from this property. You're making a media with the name of this property on it. And you're just, like, dragging it through the mud for no reason and just kind of spitting on it and kind of, like, by implication, like, making fun of it. That it's like, Robin's for kids, so our Robin is some fucking hothead cop boy whose name is Robin, because who would ever get a superhero name that's Robin? Robin's a dumb superhero name, not like Batman, which is a cool superhero name for cool guys.
I mean, you know... Say what you will about Frank Miller, at least the guy uses Robin and seems to like Robin. Like, Carrie Kelly Robin in Dark Knight Returns is fucking great. I love Carrie Kelly Robin. I don't...
Probably the best part of that whole comic.
Totally. And I, you know, I don't really like the Robin getting locked in the basement and having to eat rats and learning that he's the goddamn Batman. But, you know, it's still better than this.
Yes, it's still Dick Grayson,
Yeah.
who was, like, a part of, like, the Flying Grace's circus act and all that shit. Like, this character bears zero resemblance to any form of Robin. Again, there's, like, at this point, there would have been at least 4 mainline Robins in the main continuity, and then countless ones in, like, spin-offs, like Dark Knight Returns, and none of them. There's not even, like, a passing resemblance to a Dick Grayson or a Jason Todd, or a Tim Drake, or obviously the 2 Batman's actual kid Damian. Like, there's none of that. None of that. There's no element of it at all borrowed. It is a thing that could have very easily been edited out of this movie, the reference to Robin, and you wouldn't even notice it. Obviously, it's just very frustrating, and I hate that that line's in this movie.
Other than that, what do you think of the character?
It's just, I don't know. It's just a fucking whatever. He's just a guy. He's a guy who's a hothead vigilante cop. And I do think the idea of that the next Batman is like an ex-cop is one I'm pretty uncomfortable with. I think it's like crossing a line for the Batman character that's pretty gross. And the idea that's like, that's the one thing that he was missing was like literally being Bat-Cop.
Well, and it's not just like being an ex-cop, but being a cop who, like, the lesson he learns, the whole arc for him in this movie is that, like, having to answer to someone and follow rules is bad. And no one should do it because, and it all intersects with the stupidity of the No Man's Land story and the American military stuff, because his whole, like, the whole thing that radicalizes him at the end is he's trying to get the kids over the bridge, and the U.S. military, instead of helping him, fires on him and blows up the bridge, like, because they're just so into helping Bane, because Bane's so cool that I guess they just have to help him. It's, oh my god, it's such, again, it's every political thing. This is such a straw man argument, you know? It's like, the systems don't actually stop you from saving a bus of kids in this situation, Robin, John, whatever you want to be fucking called. There's no scenario where this would happen, and yet that's the thing that radicalizes him into realizing I have to be more than a cop. I have to be Bat-Cop. Fuck this shit.
Yeah, because I actually want to zoom in on that dialogue, because they bring it up in that midpoint of the movie, and then they bring it up again at the end. So at the midpoint of the movie, I want to bring this up just because we've made fun of the 24-ness of these movies. This is the most 24 like speech in all these 3 of these movies. This is after Bane exposes Gordon's lie about Two-Face, which is a thing that literally never comes up again for the rest of the movie. If you were wondering if Christopher Nolan's whole point was that the ending of The Dark Knight was fucked up and lying to the public and all that was wrong, well, no, because this is just used as a way to again have like a good dramatic moment and a piece of a bullet, a rhetorical bullet for Bane that then is never used as character development or ever comes up again. There are no consequences for the public finding out all the stuff about Two-Face. What a great payoff for the ending of your previous film. But Gordon sees that speech, and then he says this thing to Blake after Blake's like, how could you possibly do this? He says, these men locked up in Blackgate for 8 years denied parole under the Dent Act based on a lie, which is like the most on the nose, like, yes, you are right, Robin, that is fucked up. Like, you wrote it into the script how fucking clearly awful this is. And then Gordon's response to that is, a lie to keep a city from burning to the ground. Gotham needed a hero, someone to believe in. And Blake says, not as much as it does now, but you betrayed everything you stood for. And then Gordon looks at Blake, as it says in the script here. He says, there's a point far out there when the structures fail you, when the rules aren't weapons anymore, they're shackles, letting the bad guy get ahead. Maybe one day you will have such a moment of crisis, and in that moment, I hope you have a friend like I did to plunge their hands into the filth so you can keep yours clean. This is something that the president on fucking 24 would say about fucking the Bane dude from 24, whose name
Jack Bauer?
I'm blanking on right now. Yeah, Jack Bauer. This is just such a, like, he gets his hands dirty so we don't have to, and, like, you'll be lucky. And this whole notion of, like, that in the first place, where the structures fail you, and his notion then of what it means that when the structures of, like, society or, like, policing or whatever fail you is that the rules aren't weapons anymore. It's like, who would ever frame the rules as being something that is a fucking weapon? Like, that's the most dirty cop fucking justification you could possibly come up with. And the crazy thing that that's not a point at all that, like, the movie has any kind of, like, issue with him saying that where the rules aren't weapons anymore. And then at the end of the movie, you have one of the last scenes with Gordon and Blake, And Gordon asks Blake now, hey, can I change your mind about quitting the Force? And then Blake says, no. What you said about structures, about shackles, I can't take it. The injustice. I mean, no one's ever going to know who saved an entire city. So they do a specific callback to that line where Gordon's saying, like, Gordon's confronted with his corruption, with his deceit, and all of the sins from the previous movie. And he says, well, we had to do it because someone had to do it, and I had a friend and he got his hands fucking dirty for it, and blah, 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 blah. And then instead of that being a thing where Gordon has to reckon with the sins of what he committed at the end of the past movie, instead, the character who was saying, hey, this was fucked up, the fucking shit you did, then comes around to understanding that actually Gordon was right the whole time, and fuck this movie.
Yep. Like, so when we did our Batman Begins podcast, I noted that little moment where Gordon has a dirty partner, and the partner comes in and says, are you going to rat on us? And he goes, I'm no snitch. And I said, that's a little weird to be how you introduce Commissioner fucking Gordon as being a guy who looks the other way on corruption. And I noted that because I've seen all three movies and I knew where it was going. Gordon's a dirty cop. What else can you say in these three movies? He is a corrupt, dirty cop who fucks up and, like, damn the consequences, ends justify the means. He's not that good a guy.
Yeah, no, it's like anyone who would say there's a point way out there where the rules aren't weapons anymore. It's just like, what the fuck are you talking? Like I'm imagining as someone who like is, or when I had a job, and hopefully when I have a job like this in the future again, as a teacher, like was imbued with like a lot of authority over the kids I was teaching, and there were lots of rules that like demand this, like this. There's a certain level of conduct, both like legal rules and then like policies and stuff within the school, because you have a lot of power as a teacher and you need to use that power responsibly. If I ever heard a teacher describe the rules around like enforcing behavior and stuff like that and describe those as being weapons you can use, and that like, well, it's like we're so far out here that we can't manage their behavior, the rules aren't weapons anymore, they're shackles keeping us from doing what we need to do to keep the bad students in check, like I would go straight to the fucking principal and be like, something needs to be done because this is deeply inappropriate, and if something wasn't done, I would fucking leave that place, right? Because that is such a like deeply offensive and shocking and disgusting way to look at your role as like a servant for people in some capacity. And it's just like, it's so fucked up, this idea that like the rules that are oversight over you to keep you in check are things that you want to be able to use as weapons, and you're frustrated that they're keeping you from being able to do what you want to do. It's like, fuck off, get the fuck out of here, Gordon. I hope you lose your fucking job.
Sean, I'm imagining you in one of our high school classrooms, and like a kid comes up to you and says, hey, why'd you give me a D on this essay? That's not fair, man. And you lean in and go, listen, kid, there's a point out there where the rules aren't weapons, they're shackles. And when you hit that point, I hope you have a friend like I did to dig your hands into the dirt. Quit complaining to me about a D.
Yeah. My friend is Gary over there, and he's my TA, and he's the one that graded your fucking test, not me. It's you take it up with him. It's not me. He's Gary Batman over there in the corner.
Oh my god. Ew, bad movie, bad. Miranda Tate / Talia al Ghul, played by Oscar winner Marion Cotillard. Do you think they used the full extent of Marion Cotillard's talents here?
You know, she's a very attractive lady, and so they use that, and that's what they kind of used her for. It's like, hey, this is an attractive actress. We'll have her seduce Bruce Wayne, and then she's evil at the end.
This is 2 movies in a row,
Great
also,
character.
because this is also how he uses her in Inception as literally just the ghost of his dead wife.
Right.
Like,
yes.
Marion Cotillard is a great actress. Like, if you look at the movies
Yes.
where she actually gets to act, mostly in French, but there are some English movies where she does too. She's a phenomenal performer. Chris Nolan sees a supermodel, I think, and that's it. And that's all he uses her as. And it's stupid and offensive and sexist and all the things Christopher Nolan is.
Yeah, it's a very, like, reductive role. And it's very frustrating because Talia is just such a great character from the comics. It's so wasted. I remember that being one of the other things I was very frustrated as, like, a Batman fan the first time I watched this movie. Like, the Robin thing and that thing just pissed me off because it's, like, it's such a waste of, like, what are great characters from the source material that you're just kind of throwing the name onto some random character, and it's just yeah, I just really don't like that.
It's a very early 2000s superhero movie thing to do, like Fox X-Men stuff, you know?
Yeah. And this movie came out like a month after fucking the
Yes.
Avengers. So we were like well past that point for superhero films.
Oh
by
yeah,
the time
this movie was a dinosaur by the time it came out. It's because honestly, I think we've talked about this a lot. I think The Dark Knight in a lot of ways is a better movie than Iron Man. I think it's got much grosser ideas, and I certainly like things in Iron Man more. But between those two movies, Iron Man and The Dark Knight came out about a month apart. Iron Man won that contest going forward.
Yes.
Like, comic book movies are way more like that than they are like The Dark Knight, and I think that is ultimately for the better. The Miranda Tate stuff, it's bad. I do love trying to figure out the whatever equation had a British man named Ra's al Ghul have a French daughter. I don't really know how that all happened. I don't know where the accent came from, if she was born in the pit. There's a lot of stuff I don't really understand about the character.
you don't. I think with her and Bane, it feels like they did not cast those characters based on the character's backstory in any way. Like, it just feels like absurd that these are the two people who come from the place that they come from this like weird pit from some like unnamed like Middle Eastern country. And it's like, here's like an Irish guy? Question mark with Bane? Like, these like some sort of vague like United Kingdom-y area kind of accent, and then a French lady, and Bane and Talia. I don't know.
That you have to drag Christopher Nolan kicking and screaming to cast anyone of color. His characters are fucking white.
Yeah.
He has one black speaking role in like this entire fucking trilogy, and that is Morgan Freeman. He did cast John David Washington in Tenet. I guess that was nice of him. That's about the extent of diversity in Chris Nolan's universe. There are white people. There are sometimes black people. There are absolutely no Indian people or Arab people or anything like that. No Asians. I don't think there's any Asians in any of these movies.
Well, no, because you have a bunch of Japanese people who live in Tibet, and they're the people who taught Batman ninja stuff, because of course everyone knows that Japanese people are from Tibet.
Yeah.
That's where that is in the world.
Christopher Nolan, just the more I analyze this, the more I think of him as like a fucking dude in like one of those like colonialist explorer hats out in the fucking savannah pointing at like black people and like laughing. That's what he seems like to me.
Yeah. It's very much kind of the impression you get. I do, because that reminds me, actually, I want to pull this up, because I did, when I was looking at some of the stuff for the movie after I watched it last night, and I was like poking around on the Wikipedia page looking at stuff, I saw a quote that jumped out at me, and then I went into where the interview was from. And there was a short interview he did on Rolling Stone. Here it is, on Rolling Stone, around the time the movie came out. Yeah, July 20th, 2012, so it's right when the movie came out. And he has a statement here. I think I'm just going to read the whole interview because it's short. It's very enlightening. And so the Rolling Stone reporter asks, in the new movie, you have Bane more or less trick Gotham's 99% into rising up against the rich. Is that intended as an anti-Occupy Wall Street statement? And Christopher Nolan says, I've had as many conversations with people who have seen the film the other way around. We throw a lot of things against the wall to see if it sticks. We put a lot of interesting questions in the air, but that's simply a backdrop for the story. What we're really trying to do is show the cracks of society, show the conflicts that somebody would try to wedge open. We're going to get wildly different interpretations of what the film is supporting and not supporting, but it's not doing any of those things. It's just telling a story. If you're saying, have you made a film that's supposed to be criticizing the Occupy Wall Street movement? Well, obviously that's not true. The interviewer says, but the movie certainly suggests that there's a great danger of populist movements being pushed too far. If the populist movement is manipulated by somebody who is evil, that surely is a criticism of the evil person. You could also say the conditions of the evil person is exploiting are problematic and should be addressed. You must have your own opinion on all this. Oh, I've got all sorts of opinions, but this isn't what we're doing here. I love when people get interested in the politics of it, when they see something in it that moves them in some way. But I'm not being disingenuous when I say that we write from a place of, quote, what's the worst thing our villain Bane can do? What are we most afraid of? He's going to come in and turn our world upside down. That has happened to other societies throughout history many times, so why not here? Why not Gotham? Want something that moves people and gets under their skin. Some people would say inherently from the beginning that Batman is a right-wing character who establishes law and order by pummeling criminals with his fists. Well, yes, if you assume Gotham is the same as a place like New York City, but that's not the case. The corruption that drives Bruce Wayne to become Batman is very extreme. So your concept of does the end justify the means shifts according to the backdrop. And so the challenge of Batman Begins was to make us okay with the idea of vigilantism. The films genuinely aren't intended to be political. You don't want to alienate people, you want to create a universal story. A lot of people would argue that all art is political. But what's politics? So would Bruce Wayne vote for Mitt Romney? Before or after Bruce goes broke, ? And that's where the interview ends. So if you were wondering where Ubisoft got its whole approach of how they talk about their video games and the politics of their video games, you can just look to this interview where Christopher Nolan very specifically says that his movies are not political at all.
But it's worse. That's way worse than anything anyone at Ubisoft has ever said.
Oh, no, it's
the
awful.
Ubisoft stuff is just generic boilerplate corporate marketing speak. Like that, like, I don't know. I agree that we should like make fun of Ubisoft for that, but also the individual people giving those statements are not allowed to say anything more. Like, that's worse. Like Chris Nolan openly admitting there that like they reverse engineer the world to make Batman's point of view seem good and realistic is like shocking and horrifying. I really do think if these movies came out today, and if Chris Nolan was out there saying this kind of stuff about them, just the political environment, at least in America and on social media, is so different. These movies would be seen as so deeply problematic. Like, my God.
Yes.
These movies would be... I don't want to say Chris Nolan would be canceled, but he would be cancel adjacent for that. That is bad.
Yeah, because this is really like, if there are people listening to these podcasts that still think that we're like going too far with like the way we're analyzing this, like this interview really like kind of clarifies, I think, that whole like Christopher Nolan's very fucking dumb. Like he's good at making movies, but he's very dumb, because some of the stuff of like him saying that the challenge of Batman Begins is to make us okay with the idea of vigilantism is like, you do realize that Batman has been a character for like 80 fucking years by the time you made Batman Begins. People have been okay with the idea of vigilantism in fiction for, I mean, since well before fucking Batman. Batman is like part of a wave of characters that well predate him, that were in vogue in the early 20th century, that come from like pulp fiction, like actual pulp novels. So it's like, that's not the challenge of Batman Begins. That's what you decided, that like, I have to make some super realistic crime movie, and so then you have to wedge Batman into it. It's like, people have been like being able to have Batman be a vigilantes forever because it's fucking Batman. So that is one that is like, I think, a very like eye-opening kind of quote with his perspective on how he made these movies. And then the other one that I think is just him full on showing his ass is, I'm not being disingenuous when I say that we write from a place of what's the worst thing our villain Bane can do. And from what he's saying there is that the worst thing is for the rich people to lose their money. It's like, it's like, what if you had this guy who's going in and he took all our fucking cash, right? It's like, what if I'm like Bruce Wayne and I have all this money, and then one day I don't have my house, and I don't have like all this stuff that's like all the stuff I have with my money. It's like, what if someone just shows up and they take advantage of all that? What if one day the French Revolution happens and it happens to me? Is kind of what I see in that statement, and it's very funny in a dark way.
Yeah, I see him as like a guy in like a fucking coat and tails in a British tower, like sipping tea with his pinky out, looking down at the rabble, the common folk. What if they were to get their greedy little mitts on my money? That is the worst thing Bane could do.
Yeah, it's very much the impression I feel like he gives in this interview, and it's like, man, I was very surprised. Because again, I found the link to that through the Wikipedia page, which quotes a little bit of it, but like the full interview, when I read that, I was like, okay, yep, no, this is exactly like how you envision him when you watch these movies, is exactly the dude answering those questions.
Yeah, that's bad. Okay, I think we can start to wrap this up. One other little critique I want to give, because there are some impressive pieces of craftsmanship in this movie. I think the cinematography is, again, very good. Wally Feister is great at what he does, and I think a lot of the stuff, particularly in the end, with like just the sheer clarity and physicality of the effects work and stuff, like all of the aerial photography with the Batwing as it's going through Gotham is very impressive. It doesn't stir me in any way because I hate this movie, but like Wally Feister did good work. I will say though, I don't really like the Hans Zimmer score in this movie, or I like some of the individual themes. I think like Bane's like the drum stuff is cool. I like listening to the soundtrack sometimes. There's some very good tracks. In the movie itself, I think this movie is ridiculously overscored. Like, it is scored
Yes.
through basically all 160 minutes. There's very little silence. And so even in like some of Alfred's speeches in the first hour, you will have score under the speech, like moving it along and feeling like we're just in an endless, eternal montage that never stops and has a scene because the music is just rushing
Yes.
you along the whole time, and it makes the movie extra exhausting.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. That like there's a lot of the score itself that I like as music, and I think in particular I think the Bane piece is very effective when it's used well. But yes, there's just this sense of like you're desperately wanting a quiet, smaller moment with these characters, and like yes, and the fact that that's what's happening to Alfred when he's the character that you feel like you usually could get some of that stuff with, certainly in Batman Begins and even in a little bit of The Dark Knight. It's just like there's just like a scene of two characters talking, connecting, and it doesn't need to have a big pounding musical theme or something behind it. Losing a lot of that stuff is very, very bad.
Yeah. So that's about what I have to say on the movie. Anything else we should mention here, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Again, it is how I feel about all these movies. That it is a thing where he's very, very good at making big technical set pieces, and the technical filmmaking of a lot of that, those individual moments are very impressive. But as a whole, I think this movie very much does not sustain itself in any meaningful way at all. The politics are super gross, and it is weird, like that, like. At this point, I rewatching these three movies for the first time since like 9 years ago, basically, I have now come back all the way fully around with that 100%. The best part of these movies as a holistic sequence is just the second act of Batman Begins, and that's the only point in these movies that Batman is Batman. And I wish that we had gotten a lot more movies that were like that middle section of Batman Begins, instead of getting stuff that you've got some great villain performances, some great technical set pieces, but a lot of movies that add up to a lot of either nothing or a lot of very blood gross politics.
Yeah, I will say I am at a point where I will firmly say I don't really like any of these three movies anymore that much. I can, with Batman Begins and Dark Knight, I can respect certain things about them that I maybe don't enjoy anymore. I don't think Batman Begins or The Dark Knight are bad movies, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in them. There's just a lot of stuff that grosses me out, and that I also think genuinely does not work as storytelling and whatnot.
Yes.
I want to stress, though, when I say The Dark Knight Rises is a terrible movie, I don't mean like by the standards of like, but no, I think it's a terrible movie. I think it is on par with Batman and Robin or Batman Forever. I think it is that kind of bad. I think the thing that makes it slightly more palatable than those is A, Tom Hardy, and B, Wally Feister. This is a movie you can look at and not want to throw up, which is not the case for Batman Forever or Batman and Robin, which are the ugliest movies on God's green earth. And those are a little more cloying and annoying with their fucking characters, but I find that less cloying and annoying than trying to shove fascism in my face. So there's that. But I think it is bottom of the goddamn barrel. I hate this movie.
I think I'm basically with you on that. Like, I mean, I would kind of go around to like, I don't think that The Dark Knight is a good movie. I think The Dark Knight has the Joker, and that's great, and it's got some good technical filmmaking, but I don't think that movie's that good. Like, the only sustained stretch of like storytelling in any of these movies that I like and think is good is the second act of Batman Begins, and that's it.
That's fair. So yeah, if there's any listeners left, after we just trashed these popular movies, thank you for sticking around. Let's look quickly, Sean, at our bat schedule here. I am going to bring this up. I have a list here. So this was part 10. We have a couple more of these left to go. So let's look at what we've got. The next one is going to be Batman Under the Red Hood. We skipped over that chronologically in the sequence because that was 2010, because we didn't want to break up the Dark Knight trilogy here. But that is the next one we're going to do whenever we get to that. After that, then we have Batman v Superman, which I think at this point is worth revisiting. We have brought it up enough, and I will firmly say now, I think it is a better movie than The Dark Knight Rises. I have watched both of those again this year. I think I enjoy that movie way more than The Dark Knight Rises, and I don't think it's that good a movie. But I at least enjoy it more than Dark Knight Rises. After that, we have the Lego Batman movie. And then we have the Justice Leagues, which for this podcast, we will definitely do something on the Snyder Cut, because we have not covered it yet. Yeah. You haven't watched that yet, right, Sean? Okay.
No, I have not. I haven't primed. I could watch it, but but I'm
Yeah.
waiting now that it just like makes sense to do it in this sequence.
I'm excited. The 4K Blu-ray of that is coming out in September, and I am looking forward to that because that is, if nothing else, an unbelievably gorgeous movie. So I'm looking forward to all of these. Some of these are ones we'll be revisiting. The Lego Batman movie, obviously, we have not talked about before. But yeah, I think
Lego Batman I've never seen. That's one of the only ones of these. I think it is the only movie I have never seen any of in any capacity.
yeah.
whatsoever.
So we might have an episode where, like, if there's an off week, I might edit in like the original Justice League discussion to like really make this completionist. But we'll see. That I don't think that movie is worth talking about at all, and we can talk about the actual kind of finale to what was going on in Batman v Superman, which is the Snyder Cut thing here. So we have overall 4 more to go, which is Under the Red Hood, Dawn of Justice, Lego Batman movie, and Justice League. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of like hangers on at the end. We've done sort of the main bulk of this project, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a big part of like our original vision was this like reaching the Dark Knight Rises, and then it was like, oh, but we can, because I mean, our original plan was like, we'll maybe throw in the original Batman v Superman discussion or something like that, until now we're gonna just like fully redo it. But yeah, it's so far this has been an interesting journey to go through Batman and on film, because there are a lot of Batman movies, and there are some that are great, there are some that are terrible, but it is interesting that I think like really when I think about Batman as a character and what I like about Batman and what I would like as a Batman fan would want to see a Batman movie for, I kind of think like the only movies that do that kind of at all are the animated movies. Even though I love Batman Returns, I think that's a great movie. Batman 66 is obviously great, but none of those movies really do Batman. And I think that I'm excited to watch Under the Red Hood to get like, I want some like fucking Batman-ass Batman and not this weird pseudo-real, like we can't really do Batman properly on film because we haven't gotten that point with comic book movies yet thing that we have been with for basically all the live-action movies.
All right. Well, it's an interesting stretch to come up here. Under the Red Hood will be next. Next week on this podcast, though, will be another weekly Suit Gundam extravaganza as we dive into Mobile Suit Gundam Age, the first 2 arcs, the first 28 episodes. If you are playing along with our Gundam stuff at home, that's where we are going next. I'm excited for that. I finished the first arc today. I kind of like that show.
I'm very close to finishing the first arc. And as a little preview for some of the stuff that I'll bring up on that podcast, is I also had to dust off the old PSP emulator recently for that podcast. So there's a lot of stuff I've been doing to get ready for that thing.
All right.
So look forward to it next time on Weekly Suit Gundam.